episode.
Space exploration, maybe?
Yeah, space exploration.
These are the voyages.
Mr. Brown. Willis brought in some more Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown.
Which I thank him profusely.
I'm double coughing today.
Yeah.
No, it's no Coke fiber.
Yeah, there's no Coke fiber.
Still haven't had the Coke fiber.
Oh, well, so we did find it in L.A.
Oh.
And it's the same chain that's here in Japantown, too. So we're gonna make a pilgrimage out there.
Doesn't feel like it's the same, though.
It's also way more expensive.
Of course.
If you can imagine. Are we live?
We are live.
Okay, cool. We're live. I have to share something with you fine folks. Today I became that person.
Oh, no. Did you yell at somebody?
No, I was driving my wife to work this morning, and we passed a pile of junk on the side of the road. And lo and behold, on the end of that pile of junk was a big CRT TV.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh.
Did you stop?
I didn't. She was like, I'm late for work. Let's go. So we did. And then I circled back and I got out and I kind of tapped it and was like, what kind of connections are those? And I was like, all right, throw it in the car.
You picked up trash?
I picked up a tube television. I'm that person now. Yeah, I don't think it's a good tube television. It only had it didn't even have a component.
You made sure if there's no raccoons coming out.
Yeah, well,
no raccoons coming out of the tube.
If they are, they're in my car. I just kept it in the back of my car. So.
It's probably fine. It's just the spiders coming out now.
That's fine. We have spiders. We have pet spiders. So maybe
there you go.
Maybe we'll. Yeah. So is anybody else on the same wavelength of picking up tube TVs off of the side of the road?
Well, not tube TVs.
No, I don't think I could pick up a tube TV.
That's an endangered resource. They don't make those anymore.
That's true.
The amount of tube televisions out there are just continuing to dwindle.
It's never going to be bigger than the number it is today, unless the hipsters get into it in like 15 years, and then all of a sudden, like we start up tube TV manufacturing plants again.
Do we ever think tube televisions are going to be reproduced?
No.
No? Not even like the nichest of niche? Because it would probably just be too expensive, right?
It's a hard assembly line, right? It's not like they can take existing stuff and make it. You have to have a weird thing to make a piece of glass that size and shape. And
isn't that
thickness.
weird to think though? Like this huge staple of technology from yesteryear, they're literally just not going to make anymore.
How many tubes are in the world?
Whatever there are, the number's only going down.
Yeah, but was it like did they make 1 billion of those? Probably, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
It was also artisanal. There was a Japanese company that bought a bunch of the domestic production equipment, and they couldn't figure it out. And it turned out that a bunch of the older folks that retired were just artisans about being able to get the phosphor coating on the inside of the glass exactly perfect because it was all done by hand.
Yeah, well,
wow. How
much of manufacturing in the last century was like that, right? Like you look at there's 8 big steel presses now that can make wing spars and stuff like that left in the world. Yeah. Anyway, everything's fine. We're doing great.
Yeah. Well, I just asked Copilot Plus how many CRT TVs are left, but
doesn't know.
No, it doesn't know.
We're gonna
just progress. Well, it's just progress.
We're gonna reach a point where it's easier to replicate phosphor glow and the effect of CRT with a couple of FPGAs on an LCD or an OLED than it is to just make a new CRT.
Everything is going towards what Drexler imagined for the future would be in his nanotechnology book, which is basically 3D printing. And it's like, can we produce a display from a printing technology? Can we produce a table from a printing technology? Can we produce a micro circuit from a printing technology? That's basically where we go.
Or maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. Maybe CRTs will never be manufactured again, but at some point we're going to get a holodeck, and you'll just be able to get to experience a CRT on a holodeck. It's the same thing.
You know what's wild is we're really not very far away from I would say we'll get to a point where every consumer vehicle has an emergency medical AI. And it's like, please state the nature of the medical emergency. And it's like, I don't know what to do. And it's like, oh, you need to apply a tourniquet, or, oh, you need to do CPR, or, oh, you need to do this. And it's not a hologram, but it's going to monitor the situation and tell you.
It's probably going to lie, though, if we're real about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
You're fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Just walk it off. Eat some dirt. You're fine.
I'm having severe head
assuming we
bleeding.
fixed that.
Just put a tourniquet around your neck. It'll solve the problem.
Oh, no.
Problem solved, Adam. Problem solved.
So at least according to Copilot, I re-asked the question. I said, how many CRT TVs were ever produced? They didn't have the answer for me, but they said in Q3, for some reason, this random stat, in Q3 of 2008, CRT shipments totaled 23 million units worldwide. 23 million in quarter 3 of 2008. So I don't know what that means for,
I wonder what the peak had to be like 1997 or something, 99. Or maybe. Well, when did LCDs get like? I've been doing this for long enough now that I don't remember when stuff changed. When did we all switch to LCDs? Was that like 2004, 2005?
My E-machine had an LCD.
I mean, there were definitely holdouts, and we were probably more holdout adjacent than most people, I would guess.
No, I would think though the access to the hardware. I think a lot of us converted fairly early, but I would think it would be late. I would think it would be the late 2000s.
Is the peak?
Probably.
Well, are we talking about for monitors or TVs? Because I think those are two different too.
At that time, nobody wanted a CRT. Like, remember all those Sony? We should have just kept all those Sonys that we had piled up, but
Yeah.
So you would definitely stop on the side if you saw one on the side of the road.
Oh yeah,
I would
like a ton of money.
Yeah.
I
like that Sony Trinitron that I dragged back into the office because it was bending my desk. Like it literally, my desk has a curve in it where the monitor was in the middle for 5 years. I'm sad that I brought that back to the office before I quit Maximum PC.
Dr. Ian Cutress, Tech Potato fame, is in the chat, said LCDs were invented at my undergraduate. So I think.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I think Dr. Ian is saying he invented LCDs.
Yeah. Wow, nice job.
Good job, Ian. We got to interview you
Commercially
someday
viable LCDs. They figured it out.
Yeah, Trinitron. Anyway, so yeah, I'm glad there's other people who in the chat who appreciated me rescuing that CRT. Ziv, no, I do not know the brand. Is it a hobby CRT? So the thing is, well, with some of the other hobbies that I have, I'm just gonna bring it in here.
Oh, spider up the shop.
Yeah, because I was like, I don't really have room for this at home. But that's also like if it turns out to be like just a crappy TV and not really worth anything, then I'll just. We have access to e-waste here.
You can also send it back to its home. Just put it on the curb and put a note that says free on it on the sidewalk out there.
True.
It'll be gone in like 10 minutes.
True.
Yeah, exactly.
Just put a works.
Or maybe we'll swap out this TV for the CRT. Get that nice glow of the the people on Zoom. No, it was composite input. So I don't even know. If you can mod that. I don't know. Who knows?
I miss the old console TVs, like when somebody would have a big 25-inch TV in the 80s and it was on a floor pedestal that rotated that had those lazy Susans under there.
Yeah.
So good.
I was never into back projection though. Like I hated those TVs. They were like, oh, they're so huge and they're so light, and but they just look like crap.
Oh, now I feel personally attacked.
I didn't like the look. I didn't like the look.
Those were the days.
Yeah.
That's what everybody went through though, because you went from CRTs to rear projection and then falling to LCDs, right? So
the rear projection
plasma, but
that rear projection CRT was really nice, but it weighed about 500 pounds. It was the movers saw that and they cried. We had to have professional movers every time we moved from the time we bought that thing on.
Well, but I thought the thing was that it was lighter than CRT.
Well, it was lighter than a 55-inch CRT, which wouldn't have existed, but it was heavier, and it was the size. It was,
and usually it had speakers in the base, right?
Yeah, and it had a weird nub that poked out the back that made it impossible to make corners. It was a good TV, but it was a bad TV.
Yeah. Are we making good TV right now?
I don't know.
Gordon,
I actually would like to see. Who of us has actually experienced YouTube on CRTs? I'm just trying to think. I must have.
Not me.
Well, we must have though, right? Because when did
YouTube started in 2007?
7, right?
Yeah, but we still had CRTs in the office, so.
But I don't think we used YouTube back then. Like, think about what was on YouTube in 2007. Nothing. It was like cat videos.
What's wrong with cat videos?
The videos were like 15 minutes long.
No, I don't even think
maybe they were 5 minutes.
People singing in their college dorms was the thing back then. Yeah,
it was like Snap. It was like how much time have you spent on Snap in your life? None, because we're adults. Sorry, Snap.
I don't even know what that is, but no, I'm sure I watch YouTube on a CRT in the office.
Huh? I don't think my daughter's ever seen a CRT. Well, arcade machines. She's seen arcade machines. That's the only time she's ever seen a CRT, probably.
You've really taken us off in the weeds here,
Yeah.
Adam, with
Sorry.
the CRT talk.
I love CRTs. Get us back on, Gordon.
Adam's a
Let's
CRT guy now.
Because we do have a lot to talk about. Obviously, we have our special guest, Wendell, here from Level 1 Techs, by the way. Woo. Go over and like and subscribe, Level 1 Techs. Awesome, really good content there. We're going to be talking about Zen 5, Snapdragon X, and, of course, Intel's problems that we're having right now, which I think is probably the one that everybody wants to see Wendell to talk about right now. Everybody's lined up to talk about Wendell about that, but that will be at the end of this show. But we have a lot to talk about. Do you have more stuff stuff you found on the road?
I just cracked open my Mr. Brown. I did not find this on the road, but if I did, I would drink it if it was sealed.
No more, Adam. You're going to be like, oh, you know what? This possum is totally edible. It's not been
wait, Gordon, real quick. What's you?
You get them before they puff up.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Roadkill. No, I never ate roadkill.
Wow.
I can't
you
say
ain't lived, boy.
I know. I'm sorry. I can't say I've ever eaten roadkill.
You all have.
They used to sell potted meat in the convenience stores called It was labeled potted possum when I was a kid.
And it was a real possum?
Yeah. No, it was potted. It was like the normal potted meat, ground up bits of pig.
Oh.
But they sold it as potted possum in Tennessee in the convenience stores. It was gross.
Because that was an upsell?
Look, I think it was you're out fishing with the boys and you whip out the can. And you're like, oh, you city folk eating them Vienna sausages. I don't know, man.
Wendell.
It's pronounced Vaini.
Yeah.
It sounds like
those.
Oh my.
I have to say, I have a soft spot for Vienna sausages.
I love them.
And potted meat, because, it's like, it's so good.
Wait, you
it's
had
just
potted meat?
Oh, yeah, sure.
What?
Had
Wendell, have
meat.
you had potted meat?
Yeah. And
I don't know what this
deviled
is.
Ham.
I mean,
deviled ham
stuff.
is so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had that. That's not potted meat.
It's a canned meat product.
Oh, it's a canned meat product, like Spam. I mean, we've all had Spam.
Yeah, but this is Spam is a classy one of these.
Ooh, you put your pinky out when you eat Spam.
Like the potted meat, you could dip your finger. It's like redneck pate.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what?
It's actually really good.
It's fucking great.
Right?
Is this something we can get here?
I would disagree with you, Will. I would rather have potted meat over pate, frankly.
I think probably same. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's good. Good stuff.
All right. Well, I know what we're going to have on our next live stream.
Yes,
is some potted meat.
Now I need to look for some.
Potted meat. And I'm literally going to eat it. Scooping it out. Yeah.
It's like caviar.
All right.
A little creme fraiche.
Wendell's oddly silent over there about roadkill and potted meat.
I some of my family have literally scooped up a deer off the side of the road. Like somebody hit a deer and they were like a couple cars back and they're like, is nobody else going to stop for this?
I mean, if you smoke it and make jerky, right? That's fine. That's good. You're using the whole animal.
It do be like that sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no reason not. I mean, why waste it?
Different than possum, though.
Free meat.
like, did people stop and be like, well, no one's going to use that possum?
Don't eat marsupials. Generally.
Yeah.
The insurance will pay for the radiator, and we get a few good meals out of it. Why not? Why not do it? I can see it. I would do it.
Also, real quick question before we start, because friend of the show, Liquid R, asks Wendell, do you still have that toilet tank lid collection?
I sure do. I don't know what to do with it. It's just there. It's just taking up space.
You need to do like an update. Yeah. Where
you do a video tour, and it's just like it's like, does anybody need a 1970s aqua blue toilet lid? I've got your replacement toilet lid.
Yeah,
it's
a side hustle.
It's a side effect of having plumbers. Knowing plumbers, being friends with plumbers in the family, and they're like, people chip their toilet lids all the time. It's like, do they really?
No. I didn't, yeah. All right, Gordon, let's get out of here.
Ready? We're going to start. We're not getting out of here, but it feels like we've already been wasting everybody's time already.
Going to get out of the intro.
Get out of here. Ready?
That was the show, yeah. Yeah, ready, Gordon?
In this episode of The Full Nerd, Zen 5, Snapdragon X, and Intel CPU failures.
Dang, one take.
Yeah, because potted meat. We're thinking about that potted possum.
Professional.
Welcome to episode 309 of The Full Nerd. I'm your host, Gordon Mong, with Adam Patrick Murray. Gonna go left to right.
Hello, and hello, Mr. Brown. I got a fresh can. Thanks, Willis.
Will Smith, special guest, sitting next to Adam.
Thanks, Gordon. And also thanks, Willis. I'm also Mr. Browning.
Oh, Mr. Brown. And of course, he needs no introduction. We have Wendell of Level 1 Techs on my right on my screen. I don't know where he's in your screen, but he's right
Hello,
there.
thank you for having me. I'm having unsweetened black tea, just loose leaf tea.
Oh, wow.
You just sprinkle some tea in some warm water.
Basically.
Yeah.
You know, besides the fact that I would prefer the potted meat, I actually will say I'm a big fan of Lipton tea these days. I don't know what it is about Lipton tea, but I'm a really big fan of it. So.
Do you do the sun tea?
Costco? Huh?
Do you do the sun tea? I put a couple bags out in a glass jar in the backyard when it's sunny out. Just let
I've done that
tea
too.
up.
Lipton, with the Lipton tea, but just sort of like the tea. I just like it because it doesn't have all the residue that. And I used to drink English tea. Sorry, I want to take us down another side road here, but yeah. Because I'll say something and Dr. Ian Ketcher's like, so he'll probably insult me. I was like,
You're like, actually, I invented tea back in my alma mater.
Why? Because I drink Teatley. I love Teatley tea. It's an English tea, and then I guess apparently that's like.
I thought it was Tetley. No,
is it? But if you're an older person in England, that's what you drink. So I was insulted.
Oh.
I picked my own tea in Taiwan, and that was a delightful experience.
Wow.
Oh, nice.
We got to hear about that later.
Yeah.
Willis is here too, controlling the vertical.
Oh, and
horizontal.
Willis, yes, controlling your vertical.
With us as
Sorry, I
always.
get that.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm also Mr. Browning right now.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah, we're all gonna need to hurry and run in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Just kidding.
We have a lot to talk about. Let's kick this off with obviously the news from yesterday. I guess Zen 5 is sort of formally lifted, even though we saw it at Computex, and we saw it sort of more lifted on it yesterday. Wendell, you're the guest here. What are your thoughts on Zen 5? Yay or nay?
AMD definitely showed it in its best light, and it was really interesting. It was interesting to see what it could do under liquid nitrogen, which is quite a lot. Thermal improvements front and center. Interesting, they're launching mobile Zen 5 at the same time. Is that the first time that's happened?
I think they get alignments once in a while. I think they had an alignment with. Was it? My brain is not working here.
I think
but
Zen 2, right?
They usually skip a generation and they have them sort of line up. But actually, I think those cores are actually still a gen behind, even when they did it. So you're right. This may be the first time we've seen an alignment with both mobile and desktop, where they're both using the same using the same cores, sort of.
Mike Clark said it was a clean sheet redesign with plans for future Zen products built in, which is nice. And so there's a I can't wait to go hands on. It looked like there's a lot to like, but like with some of the other previews, it's like I need to go hands on in order to,
Yeah, at this point, right? Because we've been fed enough preview benchmarks. We've been fed enough, chip people, executives holding chips. At this point, it's like where we got to a Qualcomm. At a certain point, we just wanted to see the damn things. People just kind of were sick of just talking about it.
Yeah, and just so people know, we were flown out. Me, Willis, and Mark were flown out to L.A. That's why we were in L.A. last week. I wasn't in there as support of my our new album being released.
What?
Wendell was there as well. Got to connect with him a little bit. But yeah, no, and some people somebody wrote an article saying no, a Zen 5 CPU was not found on a plane, and I was like, yeah, that was a joke, because I couldn't actually say where the CPUs came from, but yeah. So
Lewis Law in the chat did ask, what happened to the AMD chips you found on the plane?
I accidentally lost them on the plane here. How did I? Oh man, so somebody else found them.
Some retailers may have already released some CPUs. They're out there in the wild. Oops.
Yeah.
Are they selling them, or I saw that they were stocking them, but
they stocked them, and it seems like some of the stock leaked out, but I could be wrong. That, or there's some reviewer that just doesn't care about uploading things to the internet because, oh boy, they're showing up in databases.
Yeah. But this event specifically was to get press and media and analysts down to kind of dive deeper into the technology for both mobile and desktop. Wendell, do you feel like they went deep enough for you, or?
I would have liked to have gone a lot deeper. They went. It seemed like a lot of the coverage was focused around the stuff that's coming to the table for mobile, and obviously the SoC for mobile is quite a bit different than desktop. So talk about AI tops and the AI accelerator and they didn't really explicitly talk a lot about, well, on desktop we don't care about power as much, really. And so you don't get an AI accelerator on desktop because the AI just runs on the GPU.
Which they say they provide more PCIe lanes than the competition, so that's their desktop AI strategy.
But in terms of Mike Clark was there, which is great because you could always ask them. Mahesh, I got an interview with Mahesh, which will be published in a day or two, and we were able to do a deep dive on some of the stuff in the SoC and changes under the hood, and not even really a lot to do with Zen because everybody talks about all the stuff in the Zen and the Zen cores and Zen 5. But for me, the changes on the SoC and the stuff that they're doing on mobile toward better battery life and better integration and better state management, because a lot of the wind in the sails of Qualcomm, which we'll talk about, is around battery life mainly, I think, my opinion. And so it's like, okay, if this is going to be inspirational or aspirational for x86, where's x86 going to get all its power savings? And it's going to be state management and making sure that the CPU doesn't boost as high. And the fact that almost counterintuitively, most of the time you want to live on the efficient or compact Zen 5 cores, as opposed to the beefy ones, and only wake up the beefy ones when you absolutely really need to. And it's like, okay, what plumbing changes did you make with that? And a lot of interesting stuff there.
Is it so? And for people who don't know, so obviously the desktop parts are still chiplet. You have IO die. You have two CCD, CCXs. I can't remember what the hell we're calling them anymore. And then for mobile, we have a monolithic die where you have a mix of compact Zen cores, Zen 5 cores, and then you have the full-size ones with the full size. And the only, well, interesting, because I was under the impression that the only difference was the cache, but sounds like there's more magic to it that you're going to be able to talk about in your video.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's really, on the core side, not really. That's AMD's whole strategy is they have, and I love that this was a misspeak on stage, I think, but I think they called them economy cores. Tech Potato could let us know because they were rolling in the aisles laughing.
Economy cores.
Yeah. Well, they were just for the small ones.
Less leg room.
Yeah. You just cram them in there.
As a matter of product strategy, AMD, like, it's the same core. You don't have to do anything different in your program. The scheduler doesn't have to do anything Herculean. It's just a matter of clocks and cache and some of the other stuff. But the scheduler doesn't have to worry about it. Whereas, maybe with Intel and the P cores and the E cores, they have vastly different capabilities. And so from the core strategy, not a lot has changed with that philosophy. With hyperthreading, Mike Clark said that hyperthreading is still a big part of their free extra performance at a very low power cost and a very low, which is interesting, I think, and at least in this context, in this execution context, it's like, oh yes, having the SMT, the extra thread per core is hugely beneficial. And so it's all of the other stuff that has gotten major overhauls as well. Because I thought AMD made huge strides with the 6000 and then the tweaks from the 6000 to the 7000 mobile parts, like Zen 4, like 7740 is an amazing processor. And for whatever reason, like on my Framework laptop, I've put a lot of work in, because Linux is a lot of work. But I put a lot of work in on my Framework laptop, and I've gotten to the point where I can get 11 or 12 hours of battery life. But on Windows, I can still only manage like 8. And this is mainly down to really fine-grained management of the power states and not letting things wake up the computer and keeping everything keeping a large number of cores off and keeping everything off of the other ones. And you just don't have that kind of control on Windows, but also the power management just fundamentally works different on Windows. And so it seems like they've added a lot more hardware for a lot more fine-grained control of that kind of stuff in Zen 5 based on what Mahesh was saying.
But that sounds like something that needs to be worked out on the Windows side. They can't create a thread director or something that would translate in between.
They actually so they had Windows laptops you could play with, and I may have snuck and run battery report on all of them. And there was some really interesting stuff in the battery report. And so it does look like AMD has done a lot of the software engineering on the new generation of laptops. But again, it's really going to just depend on going hands-on and figuring out how all that works. I don't know that it rises to the level of something that needs to be as complicated as Thread Director, but they have definitely worked with some of the laptop providers to do some pretty interesting stuff. One thing we can talk about is like Microsoft wants to reserve, 40 tops for their Copilot Plus and, whatever their vision is for AI, but AMD can do 50. And so they said they're already working with like Lenovo, I guess, or Lenovo and HP, or HP and Asus, major laptop providers, that the other 10 tops could be used for like their special sauce applications, which would be a competitive differentiator in the market. So those companies could offer AI accelerated stuff that's not going to eat your battery with 10 trillion operations per second, while still giving Microsoft their minimum 40 tops for Copilot Plus or whatever.
Do you think that, do you think that those add-on applications are an actual bonus for users, or do you think it's just kind of shovelware that vendors are tossing on the PCs?
I think right now it's sadly shovelware. No one has invented the killer application. Like that's actually maybe a deeper, more interesting conversation, is like, where's the killer application for users? Copilot and Recall ain't it, in my opinion. So is this if you build it, they will come? Like, where's the killer application? Where is it at?
That's a general AI problem at this point too, though, I think. We talked about that Goldman Sachs report that came out a couple weeks ago on the Tech Pod this week. And the like their takeaway is that 18 months after the launch of ChatGPT 3.5, there's still no killer application for it. Like, everything has problems and nothing's really seeing market penetration. So I don't think that's a problem limited to Copilot.
Yeah, and we learned more about the software stack, like Onyx on the AMD side. We know on the Intel side, Lunar Lake is going to be basically a WDDM interface, basically the same kind of a driver interface as GPUs use. And CUDA, of course, is the giant castle surrounded by an acre-wide moat. And so the killer application, no doubt, is going to run on a GPU. Like, when somebody comes up with whatever the killer application is, it's going to be built for GPUs first and then optimized for NPUs. So it'll probably be desktop first, then mobile. But maybe somebody will come up with a neat like AI assistant that actually runs offline and on your laptop and doesn't murder the battery, and that becomes the killer application. But it ain't here today. It ain't Gemini. It ain't ChatGPT. It's not Claude. Don't know what it is.
Yeah, and each vendor, and they did bring, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, from the head of Asus to kind of show off their new design wins and the laptops that they have. Do you remember the gentleman's name? I don't. But
I'm terrible.
Yeah,
terrible with that kind of stuff.
Talking about their experiences in the software, but then also, I think they showed off HP experience as well. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, it looks like everyone's going to have their own kind of flavor of AI features, which is actually, if we get to a spot where these are actually useful features for everyday users, that is kind of an interesting way to think of like, oh, okay, well, now when you're going to buy a laptop, not only are you looking for hardware specifications, you're looking at what each vendor has, like, in terms of tools to help you optimize your workflow on a laptop or something, like I think that's the goal. Ian says Jerry Shin, maybe. Thank you.
Maybe.
I don't know.
If you're a programmer, you got to look at it pragmatically. And so as a programmer, I want my application to be as widely used as possible, and it can be widely used using a GPU accelerated stack first. And then second, if my app becomes so important that people want to use it all the time, then I want to optimize for battery life. Then I start looking at, okay, what is it going to take to run this on Onyx? What is it going to take to run this in one API or using an Intel platform? What is it going to take to run this on CUDA? And just based on, a coin toss, odds are it's going to be NVIDIA. And NVIDIA sees that. Like, NVIDIA is dumping their giant mountain of developers into doing lots of, let's call them demo applications that do like, let us just ingest all your documents locally and give you some AI that runs locally. People want that. People don't want to upload that stuff to the cloud. And experimenting with that, it's helping extend the NVIDIA moat into those kinds of personal assistant type tasks. And so the first killer application, I must have this, is probably going to be based on NVIDIA's ecosystem. And I don't think OEMs have the resources development wise to pull out that kind of thing.
Yeah. Plus, it doesn't really make sense because you again, the PCs are just a commodity. So there shouldn't be anything you can't run in your Dell that you can't run in your HP or your Lenovo in this world. So I don't know if that's going to be how people select. I don't think people will select their laptop the way they select their phones, because you could arguably say for a while for phone vendors, like, oh, I want this feature that only LG has, or this feature that Huawei or Samsung has. I don't know if that's going to apply to PCs where everybody sees them as generically PC running Windows, right?
I think they want that.
The vendors want that.
Yeah, the vendors want that.
Yeah, but like, nothing in the 30-year history of the PC tells me that the PC vendors are going to be able to make software I actually want to use. Like the software that ships with the PC is always something to be avoided wherever possible for me.
We were just talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Ironically, the Apple ecosystem is the one counterexample of that, where it's like, I want all the stuff in the Apple ecosystem. And it's like, well,
I think that was more true 10, 12 years ago than it is now, though. I think Apple has, like in the early days of the unibody Macs, when the iWork suite was shipping free with every Mac, and you got GarageBand and all these tools, these content creation tools that didn't have real parallels, that didn't cost a fortune on the PC. Like, that was a real competitive advantage. I think the cost of a lot of that stuff has gone down. You have Affinity on the photo editing side. There's a ton of Audacity and a bunch of good Reaper, a bunch of good cheap, free, low cost audio editing and video editing tools are available now, and it feels a little bit less like you're using all these Apple developed apps on the Mac now than you used to. Like, look at what they've done with Final Cut. Final Cut used to be the thing that everybody used to edit video, and they've tanked the whole thing.
That's where I started.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. And I think I would go even a step further and say that the proliferation of really amazing web apps, including web apps you can run like a local app, Discord is probably a good example of this, has made everything much less ecosystem dependent. And that's one of the best arguments for like ARM. Like, people don't care what they're running on as long as they can sit down and run their thing. Like, we're almost to the point where people just don't care. It's like, can I get this thing? Does this thing that I want work?
So the one advantage I think Apple has in all this AI, the consolidation stuff, is that because they have a phone and a desktop and a mobile ecosystem, the weird thing that's happened over the last 20 years that I don't think any of us expected when the phone took off is that was going to be the center of all of my data, right? Like my email, my text messages, my Signal messages, and all of my communication goes through the phone now. And if it goes to the PC, that's a secondary path. And Microsoft doesn't have access to the important part of that data. Microsoft doesn't even have an active contacts list for me anymore. Google doesn't have an active contacts list anymore. Apple is the one who has that contact list for me.
Mine's in Google.
Yeah, but I mean, you're an Android user, so
yeah.
But the thing is that even Google doesn't have access to both the PC and phone side of that. The only company that has both of those is Apple at this point.
Unless you use a Chromebook.
Unless you use a Chromebook, which,
Well,
I'm not 12.
Yeah. Back to AMD real quick, though. Gordon, a lot of people ask this question in the comments. You know the price of these new desktop chips. Come on. Just tell us you know the price. That's what everyone wants to know. Why are you holding it back?
We don't know the price. I mean, Wendell, do you know the price? Yeah,
not officially.
Don't know the price.
Oh, he shook his head yes for audio listeners. I'm just kidding. No.
I think people just need to understand that's like the one thing they're going to hold, because it may be a competitive advantage to the end because they want to wait, and we're not gonna find it to the last minute. So,
do we have release dates yet?
Yes.
Okay.
July 31st.
31st for desktop parts, yeah, and then 28th for mobile parts, but that's up to vendors and stuff like that too.
Yeah, but they're holding the prices for the actual CPUs very close to their vest. So
yeah, the 31st.
And again, it'll be the very last minute. So I wouldn't pay much attention to all the guesses that people are going to be putting out there.
Yeah, 31st is 2 weeks from tomorrow as we're recording this. So.
Well, I mean, you think about it, they're not like, they can't change anything about the microarchitecture or anything about any of the hardware at this point. The only thing they can change is they can't change the price, they can't change the name, they can't change the numbers, they can't change anything about that. All they can change is the price at this point. So it's the last lever they can pull. They're going to wait until the very last minute to pull that.
Packaging's done.
Yeah, packaging's been done for months, probably.
All that stuff. Yeah. The
stickers, they're all done.
No, it's not going to come in at $1. Ian says they could change it by $50 overnight before launch. We don't know. Right. So I mean, any guesses, Wendell? Do you think that it's going to stay the same? Do you think they could go cheaper? now hearing, all the work that they've done with these new cores?
I don't know. It's hard to say because, if in terms of maximizing, it's like there's what I want and then there's maximizing shareholder value. And those are two different things by a lot. They got to be looking at what Intel has planned with Arrow Lake for desktop, because we saw the motherboards at Computex, which seemed to be in a reasonably complete level of completion.
Yeah.
And so you would think that, but then it's like, what's the rumor on when we're going to see processors for those? And it's like, I don't know. And so AMD, if AMD priced really aggressively, this could be a chance for them to really undercut the competition in a way that would be difficult for them to compete with, just in terms of like cost of the product. That probably doesn't maximize immediate shareholder value, but long term it might. But then does AMD have a volume problem on their hand in terms of like, will they be able to meet that kind of a volume if they move the amount of market that they capture several percentage points? And I think the safe bet is probably not for them to do that. But the aggressive option is interesting.
Yeah, well, and the weird question I had is that they kind of have the opposite thing where the new motherboards aren't going to be at launch, right?
Yeah.
And so really, and hey, listen, not everyone are day one buyers. Obviously, they sell CPUs, throughout the generation. Actually, I would love to hear when CPUs get sold the most, because I think a lot of people think they sell most of their CPUs right at launch, and it's like, no, actually, it's probably you get all the enthusiast people right on board, and the bulk of it is later. I'd like to know kind of when.
Well, there's two graphs, right? It's like what percentage of supply they're selling, and then the total volume shipped, right?
Yeah. So you're either, for this launch at least, before the new motherboards come out, you're either capturing people who are upgrading, which I think is a compelling enough upgrade, and then or people who are building new with the older chipset. But if you're building new with the older chipset, would you just wait for the newer chipset to come out?
There's really not a lot of huge differences that I could tell from what they shared.
No. I mean, maybe some new designs and things like that. Also, I like that they simplified the lineup. No longer the A series. So now it's you got three flavors of B series? No, 2 flavors.
USB 4, it's nice to see USB 4 as a standard feature as well, because AMD has gotten quite good at their PCIe tunneling, quote unquote Thunderbolt compatible interface on mobile. More and more mobile designs have properly working USB 4, which I'm very thankful for. USB 4 is a little anemic in terms of bandwidth these days, but Intel doesn't have Thunderbolt 5 inexplicably on Lunar Lake, because power. So it's nice to see USB 4 is a part of the new chipset, but in terms of everything else, you'll be fine on the older chipset. But if you're an OEM, it's got to be wild, because it's like, wait a minute, we've done at least a batch of 1,000 probably Arrow Lake motherboards. And
spoilers, breaking news.
Yeah, we saw at Computex, it was like, are these one-offs? Like, there's a lot of Arrow Lake boards here, and you don't have CPUs for them. And then AMD's like, we got CPUs, you got our boards ready? And they're just,
Gordon,
what do you selling more boards?
Yeah, Gordon, what do you make of this? Having the boards not line up? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little strange to do a launch where the boards aren't there, because I'm kind of with you, Adam, because I think if you're going to go out and buy a 9000 series chip, you want the supposed best thing for it, right? If you're going to go buy an X series motherboard, then it feels like you're going to want the next generation motherboard. So it does feel kind of weird why they would launch that way, but maybe that also kind of implies that this is not going to be like one of those things where you're going to be blowing it out, where people are going to be lining up to buy the chips and buy the motherboards at Micro Center. So maybe that kind of points to that. I'm just guessing here, but it does feel pretty funky to me. So actually, I wanted to ask you something, Wendell, because it was a little confusing to me coming out of the Editor's Day stuff that I had seen and heard. And that was over the thermal conductivity they said that they'd saved. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot here, but I heard it 2 ways. One way, it sounded like they said that they had improved the heat spreader or the lid. And then later on, the chip designer says, oh, no, this is just simply how we we floor planned out the chip and where we put all the sensors. So they said it was like, we're not saying that it was done worse before, but we're doing it better now. But I don't know if you have any kind of insight into kind of any thermal improvements on 9,000 over 7,000 parts.
Yeah, it seemed like I had the same thought, and it's like, okay, is the IHS thinner now, or did you do something different with like the mounting mechanism? Does the CPU sit a little higher? Well, that doesn't make sense because it has to be socket compatible. You know, what did you do different here? And I heard both of those things, and I'd sort of internally reconciled it without thinking about it, as we have basically gotten to a point where the IHS is improved somehow physically, but also the things that produce the hot spot are better able to spread their heat around versus all of the things that get hot in the same physical area. So certainly if you look at Threadripper CPUs, and you go from 32 to 64 to 96 cores that have the same power budget, it is super easy to overclock the bejesus out of a 64 or 96 core Threadripper, because those CCDs were still designed for a lot of wattage, and it's stable and it's fine. And it's because you have a lot of heat over a large area. And, you know, you can almost keep a 96 core Threadripper at stock cool with basic cooling, because it's 96 watts over a very large area, or 350 or 380 watts on 96 cores across a very large area, versus 32 cores, which is just 4 insane hot spots, and the heat has to go that way. So it seems like they've figured out a way to distribute the heat load a little better. It could also be something different about like the physical substrate, or like the physical connections, and so that maybe heat has more than one path to go. But in it seems to trend, like as far as the overclocking demos and keeping an eye on Hardware Info 64 on the test systems they had, it seems to be real. So could be all of the assembly improvements and design improvements and contribute to 7 degrees C improvement.
You know, that's the other thing that kind of surprised me, is it felt like they took, you know, because obviously you can make a chip and you could crank the voltage up and get really, really high clocks, make a lot of heat, or you can basically make a chip that's super efficient. And I was kind of surprised that AMD made that 9700X a 65 watt part. I would have thought they, you know, the rumors were saying that they were going to push for a higher TDP part, but why push for such a power efficient desktop part when, you know, when your GPU is going to be, and your stupid RGB lights are going to be eating up all this power? Why haven't bother to do
96
that?
default. Because that was the thing, they did show the improvements for Curve Optimizer, and they're like, hey, if you want to juice more wattage into it, you know, like there are ways to, you know, have one-stop overclocking kind of stuff. So, I mean, we'll see. So, I think it's like that. There's the default TDPs that they're sticking to, but, you know, hey, if you want to push it harder, you can. So, I'd be curious to see if they're like by default they're coming out, and who knows, maybe they're looking at what happened with the Intel stuff going on. They're like, actually, you know what, out of the box, we're going to be conservative, and if you want to go in there and push it harder, you can.
But also, like, shipping low TDPs by default for a mainstream part is the responsible thing to do, because it's not like, you know, they're gonna suck a whole bunch more power. They're gonna ship millions and millions of these chips, and you multiply 20 watts here and 20 watts there by a couple of million, and all of a sudden you're talking about like an enormous amount of power that you're just wasting as heat in your house for a mainstream part. Like, that's fine.
I know audio listeners, Gordon is falling asleep.
He
says efficiency is stupid.
Just saying, it's just like, what do we? I don't. You know, I don't drive an electric car. I don't care. I feel like my desktop is like the one place I don't know, but I wouldn't ascribe good or bad things to it necessarily from a sort of like responsibility kind of thing.
Well, the 16 core part is still the same. Default TDP, where, you know, where it really feels like that 8 core part is where, you know, well, but listen, like, I mean, they were saying, hey, at a lower default TDP, I don't have the slides in front of me, but at a lower default TDP, we're still getting performance improvements over last gen, you know, which is like, oh, okay, well, damn, that's, you know.
I'm not saying that it's like that they're like saving the world or anything. I'm just saying, like, on a mainstream part, it makes sense to default slow and low TDP and let people opt into turning it up, because we know defaults matter, right? This is, look, open up Windows Update and look at that thing. Hey, Windows Update cares about the environment, guys. They only update at specific times. But yeah, it's the same thing. Like, you're shipping a bazillion parts. Pay attention to that stuff. It does make a difference.
You know what I'm impressed about is Windows Update is the amount of intelligence. I mean, this is the reason why I'm not really worried about Microsoft collecting telemetry on users, because they can't use it right. Because you can't even get Windows Update not to install an update when you critically need it not to. Because the amount of times that it has needed to install the Windows Update at the most critical time you need it not to, but it always does it. It just makes you go like, how is this possible?
Hey, I'm going live on YouTube in 5 minutes. Hey, don't worry, your data's safe. We got you.
Yeah, now we're backing it up.
Damn it!
Yeah.
Why
You can't
did you
stop
do that?
this process. No, but I hear you. I get it. But I'm saying I wouldn't want to ascribe any kind of moral thing. So, but what I'm saying is, companies only think in one way, and that is beating competition, selling more in the competition, making more money. I kind of wonder if they just decided, like we were right, Will. They said, like, you know what? We don't think Arrow Lake's going to get pushed down to i5 anytime soon. So all we're going to be going up against is repurposed 13 gen, 14 gen parts, right? So why even worry about it? And if we can beat them at this lower power level, then who cares, right? Why even wait till, maybe if they get an i5 Arrow Lake out in time, they think there is a problem, then they can rev apart. But it just feels like they don't really. It feels like AMD's pretty much thinks like they're in control at this point on desktop.
I mean, it feels like they are from what I'm like.
If not market share, at least mind share, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
There's two things working in their favor right now. One is that their parts are pretty good, and the other is that the other company's having problems, right? So,
well, Wendell,
lots of problems.
Yeah. Well, Wendell, did you? Excuse me. With all this Zen 5 stuff, did you walk away like feeling like, oh yeah, stoked, hell yeah, like AMD, that they're doing awesome stuff, or did you walk away like, oh, okay, yeah, this is good. We'll see how performance is, but it feels good.
It cannot be understated how amazing it is to have a boring execution machine in this. Like, it is unusual to get this much IPC uplift, plus some little clock bonuses here and there because of the increased efficiency. We've gotten used to it, but AMD has consistently executed every time, and that is impossible to do. See also 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9th generation Intel. It's like if we just look at consistency of execution, and it's like, well, we had the fab problems, and then we had the 14 plus, and then we got to get Pat back. We got to get a new CEO. We got to do this. We got to jettison our networking technologies. We got to, there's a lot going on there that's going to contribute to the inconsistency. But AMD has been a boring execution machine with a laser focus, and it is starting to really, really pay off.
Boring in a good way or bad way, though?
Boring is good when you just got to get stuff done. Like, it's Thursday. I need to compute.
do you think, are they going to keep selling Zen 4? Like, are we going to see 7 series parts in the channel for a while?
Oh yeah.
Like,
they just launched the 16-core 5900 XT, which is like the perfect home server CPU.
Yeah, so it's not like, well, except for it doesn't have quick sync if you're running Plex, but that's a whole other thing. So it seems like there's an opportunity for them to price these new parts higher than the Zen 4 parts, and like gain make money and gain market share at the same time until we see Arrow Lake come out later this year, theoretically.
Actually, you know what? That is a good question, though. Like, yes, Ryzen 5000 has shown that it's going to be around for a while. They just had new chips released or announced, whatever. But yeah, maybe Ryzen 7000 will kind of fade out, and yeah.
The X3D stuff will stay around for a while, at least, presumably, right?
Yeah. Well, until the next X3D stuff, yeah.
Later this year, maybe.
But the Zen 4 AM5 Epic 4004 will continue for the foreseeable future, which is all the same parts, but now in a server context. And this is the really amazing thing at Computex. In 2023 in Computex, I was freaking out. I went around everywhere, and it was, why is there no AM5 motherboard configured for a server-ish type work? Like, these should be launching the same day. This Computex, everybody, even the ODMs that you don't like normally only make Intel stuff, were making AM5 stuff. MSI had some amazing AM5 platforms. MeTAC, Tyan had some amazing AM5 stuff. ASRock had made some amazing AM4 stuff, and they're continuing the tradition. No surprises there. This is their, it's old hat for them. But everybody under the sun was making AM5, IPMI, out-of-band management, and then out of nowhere, AMD is like, oh yeah, we're just going to relabel these CPUs as EPYC and give you some more ECC qualification and a couple of things. AMD really dotted the I's and crossed the T's under the hood for stuff that was annoying me in the background, that was not perfect with the 7000 series CPUs, that is now fixed in the and it's just a software thing. So it retroactively fixed the problems that I had, because I like the 7900 No X as a home server AM5 CPU. And so seeing all of that at Computex is just like, yes, AMD is going to sell every 7000 series CPU they've ever made. They're probably going to have to make more. And data centers are waking up to, holy crap, we should be running EPYC because power, because whatever. And we can talk about this more in the Intel section. Yeah. But as a result of working on the Intel thing, and not because the CPUs have problems, a lot of these data centers are designed for racks that are only rated for like 20 kilowatts of power. It turns out one really amazing way that those companies can still make a boatload of money on their relatively constrained power environment is not even server CPUs. It's to roll out gobs and gobs of 16-core AM4 or AM5 based machines for customers, because a lot of the time that's all a customer needs, and you don't necessarily want a fully virtualized or containerized workload, although sometimes you do. And sometimes EPYC does make sense, but the ridiculous single core clock speed for a lot of internet facing stuff is really nice. And the blast radius of only having a 16 core machine die when it dies is also nice, versus 128 core Bergamo taking out half your customers.
Good point. Wow, interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, testing coming. Do you test the mobile stuff? Are you gonna?
Not usually, but I'm gonna go out of my way to. I went out of my way to mess around with ARM, because ARM on Linux has me really excited potentially, and I went out of my way to do some testing on the 7000 series in both mini PCs and laptops, and so I'm itching to take Zen 5 for a spin in terms of power management, because I found some really interesting stuff on the Linux side in terms of how you can approach power management on Zen 4.
How did you feel about the rebranding of changing Ryzen to Ryzen AI officially?
They needed to. They needed to work on their numbering, but it's not. They're not speaking to me with those changes. I get why they did it, and I get that it needed to be done, but
did it really?
How are you going to know that it's an AI part without having AI in the name?
Yeah.
Because the desktop ones don't have AI in it. So
yeah, that's true.
And now you know.
Well, but could you run it on the GPU? But then you don't have enough developers to make the magic of that go away.
Look, I just love my old Intel Pentium Wi-Fi that came out 15, 20 years ago. Those were great.
Centrino was good.
Yeah.
I just kind of think it's. I know people like to bag on the AI branding, but it is a very, very different crowd when you're talking to laptop buyers that are buying a $1,000, $1,200 laptop. So you have to get your branding in there. And let's be honest, AMD's branding is simply not that strong on mobile, and that's really, they've had really good parts, and they've used to be where like a decade ago you can only get them in junky, plasticky, horrible laptops. You can get them in premium laptops now. Very nice experience, but the problem is convincing consumers to pay for AMD brand over Intel. Because that's what they go. They go, oh, it's Intel. I always buy Intel when I shop at Costco, right? So
the playground conversation is this a Chromebook? It's not an Intel. When I was like, hey, this is a pretty nice laptop for $600.
Yeah, so I think the AI thing frankly makes sense. And the other precedent I always point out is AMD at one point came out with the Athlon XP, remember? And we all just were like, oh my God, really? Just because they're calling the operating system Windows XP doesn't mean you have to call the CPU that. But it probably was the right decision because, frankly, oh, if I'm going to buy a new machine, desktop PC, it's Windows XP. I guess this Athlon XP must work well because it's got XP in the name, right? So
See,
I think it's cynical, but it works.
They were in the same situation then too, right? Because Intel had a kind of crappy, overheated, death march to 4 gigahertz design,
and they still sold way more.
Yeah,
I bet. They probably sold. I don't know how many more Pentium 4s outsold them, but I remember always like giving them like this chip was a failure, and they'd always be like, you know how many of these stupid ass chips we sold, Gordon? Like, you know, like okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
that's what happens.
Hey, we got BTX out of that, so I think we're all winners.
I will say that while they didn't have anything official to show for handheld stuff, you know, and that's I'm always on the lookout, right? I did notice in some of their they had like a sizzle reel video at the beginning of the presentation, and they showed very clearly the Steam Deck. And yeah, it's something they haven't included in sizzle reels before, so they're like, oh yeah, handhelds, you know, it's a big deal.
It's probably, you know, they're probably approaching like the 20th most popular laptop SKU numbers with the Steam Deck now, right? Like,
probably not that close.
there's only two SKUs basically, so you know.
Yeah, but still, I mean, for them to give that little wink and nod in there, I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Do you get the feeling they're just going to repurpose? I mean, it feels like it's proven itself that the actual chip that will go into handhelds that will be marketed could actually be purpose-built rather than just simply repurposed from mobile purely, right? I mean, do you really need all those compact cores on?
Yeah, do you really need, and do you really need the AI NPU acceleration stuff?
Right.
I mean, probably not.
Yeah.
Good question.
So it could be a pretty good banger part, is what it kind of feels like when it comes out, because they know Intel wants to get in here, but.
I mean, listen, when you're talking about, oh, hey, efficiency, handhelds is one of those places that is like, ooh, efficiency?
Well, the Zen 5 compact cores, or economy cores, whatever, plus RDNA 3.5, because they made a lot of changes specifically for improving the whole memory cache thing on RDNA 3.5, and that looks like a huge win that has handheld computing written all over it. And it's like, don't even give me non-compact cores, just give me
speaking of memory, so that was the other thing, higher JEDEC speeds, and what did they say the speed could top out at now?
8,000, I thought.
Was it 8,000?
Was it 8,000?
Yeah,
it's 8,000 on desktop, but I was thinking
on desktop. Yeah.
The LPDDR, it gets a little blurry and it's different. And the 8,000 on desktop is more like they're going to recompute the timings for you, which is amazing. And I've got a really amazing clip for my video, which is it's memory optimization performance profile, it's MOPP. And I've got it's like I've run up to all the people at AMD and I say, "Are you down with MOPP?"
Yeah, you know me.
They don't understand. It's great.
They don't. Oh no. Well, Dr. Ian Cutress reminds me of good information when they talked about RDNA 3.5 and the improvements there. They said they were able to roll in the things that they learned with the Samsung collaboration. And to say, oh wow, like the graphics processing that we learned on mobile, or actual phone stuff, could feed into these actual chips as well. Which I was just like, oh okay, well that's awesome. They called it out specifically. Hey, a lot of these are improvements because we worked with Samsung on really low power devices.
Right, and no doubt if they were paying attention with Samsung, they're also paying attention with how things work on Proton and Valve and Linux and everything else. So. At the end of the day, Steam Deck is Zen 2. Zen 2! And they did all that with Zen 2.
Yeah.
And RDNA 2 also. It's old. It's old hardware.
It's old, but it's still awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
But people continue to wait for ARM handhelds to come out. ARM-based handhelds.
Oh,
yeah.
For gaming, really?
Yeah, no. Some people are like, "Hey, this could be perfect for handheld gaming."
They've tested thousands of games, Adam. Thousands,
tested. At least thousands of games.
That's good messaging, isn't it? That is a really good way to say it.
What a big number!
Or another way to do it is that AMD was sure to get on stage and talk about, oh, hey, we're going to show some charts and graphs of these games that are playable on these new Ryzen AI 300 parts. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then here's here's bars where we could have represented Qualcomm performance, but the game didn't run.
Weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, only 1 in 2 games actually works.
The conversation Gordon and I had when we were watching that keynote during
You can
Computex
switch over. Yeah.
was literally, hey, like how many of these are actually going to work? Their fight is everything that you run on this has to work, right? Like everything you want to run has to work, because otherwise the marketing from AMD and Intel is going to be unified. And if you want a computer that runs your software, all of it, then get our thing. Otherwise, there's this great thing out here that costs the same and has the same battery life. And anyway, yeah, things are going great over at Qualcomm land. It seems like.
Are they? Wendell, you did an awesome video. Everyone, I need to link to this in the description. I should do that before I forget. But you did an awesome video, kind of talking about the ARM promise and things like that. So why don't you kind of talk a little bit about your thoughts on this? Not that you need to regurgitate the video, because people should watch it.
I sort of felt like the odd man out, because I have the battery life is really amazing, and like ARM got suspend and sleep and all of that right, and pretty much every other promise, and the battery life is not as amazing as they promised. Like if you go back to the Hawaii presentation and you go back to stuff even before that in their marketing, the battery life is good compared to x86, but it's still not as much as they promised. And the specific experiences I'm looking at is like, okay, is this Microsoft's Apple M1 moment? And the answer is heck no, because this, the Surface, the $1,000 Surface laptop is like a dual fan design, and it has better battery life than the x86 equivalent, but pretty much everything else is not as good of an experience as x86, just using Discord and like everyday applications. Edge runs great. Chrome runs great. The fact that you can just close and open the laptop and but once we get past the battery life and we start looking at other things, it's like, I'd like to run Linux. The whole EFI lockdown thing is really annoying. It's like, okay, maybe that's just Qualcomm and Microsoft not remembering that Linux is a thing. Fine. But then there's also kernel patches for the GPU. And you have to have an enablement key. There's a cryptographic aspect of enabling the GPU on the darn thing. And so it's like, okay, are we just actively hostile to Linux at this point? Like, I've gotten past the EFI thing. Now I just want to turn on the GPU, but the CPU won't operate in a higher level of execution unless I cryptographically handshake it or with it or whatever. And so there's a Linux kernel thing that just happened today. And that kind of thing makes me think that this platform is half-baked. And then I started looking at other, like the developer experience aspects of it, and it's like, this is half-baked. The developer kits, PSA, if you wanted an ARM developer kit, they just went on sale. You can go to Arrow and buy them. That only just happened today. Those are due out well before the launch of the ARM laptops. That did not happen. And so there are major game companies that have BCC'd me on emails to be like, where are our promised free dev kits so that we can get our game working on ARM? And silence and or unsatisfactory answers. It's like, just go ahead.
Oh, I was just so to contrast that, when Apple did the ARM switchover, when did they ship dev? They shipped dev kits like a year in advance. Is that right?
A year in advance with a fire-breathing NDA, and they demanded them back and have put them in a wood chipper shredder, so they are extraordinarily rare.
Wow.
Yeah. But it was like there was a plan that gave people time, because it takes a long time to change, especially something as complicated as a game, but it takes a long time to build, to shift your pipeline and port to a new architecture for a lot of applications, right?
Yes. And Microsoft, for their part in this, they are not blameless. The Windows ARM dev kits, which are from 2023 and are not bad, and have been available for a very long time, they did not get the same Windows Core update. The kernel was different on those for no reason compared to what launched on laptops. And the GPU is different, of course, because it's different hardware. But there's no reason that Windows on ARM on that ARM should have been different than Windows on ARM on the laptops. And Microsoft just did not have the developer bandwidth. Apparently, that's what I infer from that situation, to competently execute on that, which is amazing.
Oof. So you got to something with your video that I thought was really interesting. It's something I've been thinking about, but like, do you think it seems like when Microsoft is pushing ARM really hard this go round? Like it seems like they're ARM first with the Surface, with the Qualcomm partner laptops. All of that is seems to be the main focus. Do you think that they're looking at the success Apple's having right now as like they're like what do you think is the basis for that? Like, are they do you think that they're ascribing it to, hey, people like Macs because they have iPhones? Do you think it's, hey, ARM is better for laptops than x86 is? Like, do you think they have what do you think, what's the vibe you're getting there?
I have an amazing, and this is so scathing, it will be scathing to us. I don't know if the audience will understand how deep this cuts, but I think that Microsoft thinks that a lot of the problem with the Windows ecosystem is third-party software that does integration. So like game anti-cheat is usually like a kernel level hook, and that can introduce all sorts of untoward instability that has nothing to do with the game, that crops up when you're not even running the game. You know, that goes back many years. I'm sure Gordon remembers like the Sony rootkit fiasco, another example of that. And so I think Microsoft thinks that a lot of the poor experiences people have with Windows, Microsoft is not at fault for. And certainly that is true. However, a lot of the OEM partners shipped on the Snapdragon laptops software like McAfee, which probably not a good user experience. And at least my own personal experience is once I uninstalled that, it ran better and I had better battery life.
Weird.
It's wild. It's weird. It's the same experience on PC, but it was also the same experience on ARM. What's
the percentage they get when you activate that McAfee install? Is that?
I think it's a lot.
Yeah, it must be, right?
Yeah, and there was I think it was like Paul Thurrott or somebody retweeted some of the things on Microsoft executives where it's like the Apple experience is you get a laptop that doesn't have stickers, and all of the Qualcomm laptops have stickers to let you know it's a Qualcomm laptop, not an Intel laptop. So we're replacing Intel stickers with Qualcomm stickers. But fundamentally, the carnivorous earwig that goes in somebody's brain was not, we should build an amazing consumer experience. It was, got to get away from x86.
Well, so like we've done this before. We did this in like 2012, 2013, 2014 with, we did this in the XP to Vista to 7 transition when everybody was shipping laptops, when everybody was shipping computers with a bunch of crapware pre-installed, and you'd open it up and it didn't even look like Windows, and you had to like X through a bunch of offers that you were canceling out because everybody had slimmed their margins down to the point that the only way they were making money is if you activated Norton after you bought your $400 PC at Best Buy. And then Microsoft came out and said, hey, if you want to get this particular certification, you got to ship a pretty plain Windows. It's got to go boot into this, and we got to do all this stuff. And I guess like Ballmer fired all those people out of the airlock like 10 years ago because they're doing the same thing again, except for this time it's them that's causing now it's OneDrive and Live 365 and Xbox Ultimate and all the Microsoft features instead of McAfee and Norton and 50 other things.
Those are still there too.
I mean,
you will accept OneDrive. It is no choice. You can't do the OOBE command line thing. It does not work.
No, it works for me
on ARM.
On ARM. Oh, I should try that on this laptop.
Does not work on ARM. You also used to be able to enter admin, and it would be like, there's a problem with this account. I don't know. Let's just make a local account because there's a problem with admin at Microsoft.com. And that doesn't work either. And so it's just, this is the level of adversarial that you get immediately out of the box. It's like, I don't want to do that. Is there a way for me to not do that? No.
Actually,
you have to.
I think I did do the OOB thing on this laptop.
It didn't work for me.
Oh, no, because I learned that trick too. We need to do a video on that.
I can do a short for that. That's a good one. I'll put that on the list.
I've been doing that for the past year or so, ever since I learned it. So I don't remember not having a problem with this one.
Well, I do want to say something in defense of OEMs because it feels like everybody just likes punching OEMs in the face because it's easy to blame them for everything, and I think it's the classic. It's the classic problem that all OEMs have is like, hey, it's margins are a lot thinner these days. It's tougher. and we have to make activations. That's why we have this, what our users call bloatware from third-party software companies that are paying us when they install it. We recognize it's not the greatest experience. And Microsoft, do you think you can give us a better price in the operating system? No.
Well, but
I mean, it's a classic thing when they go to Intel too, because I remember Intel when X58 came out, they're like, "Oh my God, X58 boards are way too expensive. Is there something you can do to lower the cost of the boards?" And they say, "Well, can you sell the X58 chipset for less money?" No. So then, no, we can't lower the price of it.
Well, but you know what? The thing that they did in the Windows 7 timeframe was say, "Hey, we're going to discount or co-market. We're going to give you co-marketing. We're going to give you financial incentives to not load up these PCs with a bunch of crap, so that when the first time you open your Windows PC, you're presented with 25 offers, versus the first time you open your Mac, it's like, hey, I hope you like your new computer. Here's all the things that we like about it, and nothing's going to cost you more money." And of course, now Apple does that too. Apple hits you with, hey, you want to get your Apple One account? You can get music, you get games, you get all this stuff. So
backups.
Yeah, we're all doing, like, everybody's doing this, but it's so much worse when it's like 3 layers deep on the Windows side that I would happily pay. Like, I have to go buy a laptop for my kid. I would happily pay another $200 to not have to spend 6 hours carving out all this stuff, turning off Bing search in the Windows menu, disabling Copilot, all that stuff. There's a video coming on that. By
Everybody says it, and they get to the store like, yeah, how much for that one? Because that's $200 less. I just think that's. Yeah, I just, it's really hard to put your money where your mouth.
Put a sticker on it that says, "Hey, we're not going to ask you for more money when you buy this." That sounds great to me.
Eventually, I think we get to a point where Windows reset, like the out-of-the-box experience, Microsoft dictates that it is going to be a clean install, or kind of like what the Microsoft Surface out-of-the-box experience is, which is you reset the machine and then all of that stuff is gone. So you don't even bother going through the OEM install. You just hit a button and it's like Microsoft says, "Okay, we've pulled the Windows image from the cloud as opposed to whatever's on the restore partition on this drive, and now you're back to a clean Microsoft experience."
I mean, that's the first thing I do when I buy a new laptop is I just nuke it and reinstall Windows from scratch, and then it's like, which driver did I miss is always which one has the surprise payload of the Yahoo toolbar.
Yeah, well, I think contrast that to the Apple experience, which is when you pull it from the cloud, it's all there.
Yeah.
Like the Microsoft with the Surface hardware is supposed to be that experience. And at some point, somebody got hit in the head with a hammer or something and forgot, oh, yeah, we could just make the experience that because we control everything. That's what Surface RT was supposed to be. And so we've been doing this for a decade now, and we still haven't managed to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. It's frankly, like, if you're inside Apple, like, you're looking at this and it's like, all of this is old hat now. How is our competition still screwing this up so royally when it's obvious to even Luddites? Like, you just follow the steps to put it together.
Well, and the saddest thing of all for Apple is it's a market that they really don't even care about very much. Like,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah, exactly.
Hey, bonus money.
Yeah. It's just.
They have to have a way for people to make apps for their phones and tablets, right? They're not going to do that on Windows PCs. So we got to keep making these laptops, I guess. I don't know.
Is it that's why they keep MacBooks around?
That's been my theory for a long time at this point.
Yeah. Oh. Like, somebody's got to develop all these Apple or these iPhone apps. So I guess we'll make a platform to do that.
So focusing back on Qualcomm, though, do you, Wendell, I mean, it sounds like you're not blown away by the power savings. Like, because I didn't go to the Hawaii presentation, but I didn't realize that they had promised even better battery life, and it's just gotten shorter and shorter. And my own experience has been like, it's better, but Yeah,
it's so on the I got a Minis Forum tablet with a 7740, and under medium load, the battery life is almost identical. Where Qualcomm seems to shine and claw back some battery is when you're doing almost nothing. It seems to use almost no power when you're doing almost nothing. Whereas when I debug what's going on the AMD CPU, it wakes and sleeps a lot, and that chews up a lot of power. At least, overall over the averages. And that is definitely something that needs to be improved on the PC side. But in terms of like the per core performance in that medium load scenario, it's almost identical between the two machines.
When you say wakes and sleeps, you mean like while the PC is active, the CPU is going to wake and sleep states inside that active time? Yeah.
Yeah. And that chews up a lot of power, and doesn't seem to be as efficient and well controlled as it is on ARM's platform. And certainly at the lower performance states, it seems as though Qualcomm has an advantage on these CPUs, but it's nowhere near. Like, you should be able to run the $1,000, in my mind, the $1,000 Surface laptop should be fanless, or maybe one fan, not a dual, because you're losing a lot of power to the fans too. Just physically not having the fans saves a lot of power on these AMD laptops. If I run the CPU at a low state and there's a BIOS option, and I set it and it's like, no, the fan is not allowed to come on. Just not running the fan gives me at least another 30 minutes, maybe 45. So, yeah, but it puts a ceiling on the performance that I can have, and I can't even play a light game in that scenario. Qualcomm, in their presentation, they promised 1,800 games would work at launch. BattleEye did not work at launch, which takes out a huge number of games. They're only just now getting the native ARM stuff to work. Kernel mode drivers are not an option, so it's like, well, guess you got to do your anti-cheat, which is, I actually like that. I actually like that Microsoft is like, hey, you can't do this. But it's also why a lot of printer software doesn't work, is because they have been coloring outside the lines for years. And that is a rotting, festering part of Windows that should have been corrected a long time ago. So the ARM platform is an opportunity to fix that, which is a good thing. And so it's good that your printers don't work, but it's bad that your games don't work. Yeah, I'm talking about the same thing in two different contexts. And so there is a little bit of a hole in my argument there.
On the anti-cheat side, is the idea that if there's no kernel mode access for the anti-cheat, there's also no kernel mode access for the cheats, so it's probably going to be okay? Or is this just, hey, the anti-cheat people can't be bothered to deal with this?
In the specific case of BattleEye, publicly they were working on it. We need partnership with Qualcomm to do this. Behind the scenes, BattleEye developers were very WTF, why is it such a pain in the butt to get native ARM binary working? Why are they telling us to just use x86 emulation when they know that it's not going to work for this use case? And so the inside baseball that I have from a couple of game developers has been, it's very hard to support this platform because we don't have a channel to the developers that can correct the problems that we found. Too much is changing from GPU driver version to GPU driver version for us to keep up, and things that we fixed previously or worked around previously are now broken in a driver update that's less than 2 weeks old. While the changelog was quite verbose in the June 10th GPU driver update, a number of OEMs torpedoed the GPU driver update because it introduced regressions. One of the developers told me that they didn't have a fully operational DirectX regression test suite, which is kind of like developer 101 for, we're building big boy things now, and we need to make sure that the new thing doesn't break the old thing. So we don't do that by hand. We have this machine that we build in software to go off and do all that testing. And that's kind of like developer 101 inside Microsoft. And so if Microsoft didn't lend a hand to build that for Qualcomm, and Qualcomm didn't, hire tens of thousands of developers to do that, this is not a formula that leads to success.
So it's funny because it seems like the circles of software that doesn't work on Linux/Proton and software that doesn't work on Windows/ARM is kind of like a circle instead of a Venn diagram. Is it like anti-cheat and anti-piracy and anything that needs kernel mode access and
Discord?
Yeah, Discord. Yeah.
Wow. Which is wild because Discord is mostly browser based. Like, how did you mess that one up?
Yeah.
It's also kind of funny that you mentioned Linux, because right now gaming on Linux with Proton is a better experiencing than gaming on ARM.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, are you really just here to try to get us to say, hey, if you want to buy an ARM laptop, you should really install Linux on it? Is that where you're going with all this?
I really thought, because Qualcomm, Galaxy phones and some of the unlocks with what Qualcomm has done in the past to run Linux is not a terrible experience. It's nowhere near this terrible. And I'm surprised at the landmines that developers are encountering in trying to add support. Because Qualcomm they've shown off Lenovo. I think Qualcomm Insider had shown off a Lenovo laptop running Linux competently. And it's like, all right, great. Where's the website I go download that? Do you have a developer forum? Do you have an unofficial developer forum? Is there an unofficial developer Discord? Where's the stuff to get that running? Because the Linux community would love nothing more than a reasonable ARM laptop that is reasonably well documented. And Microsoft probably doesn't want that. But for the very first thing that we were discussing, where it's like, people care less about what they run stuff on, and if things are web enabled and we're moving into this world, like even Apple's worried about this. Because Apple's worried about this is why they nerf the performance of WebGL and WebAssembly on mobile devices, because it was too good of an experience. We have to steer people toward the App Store. And so we move toward this world where stuff runs in web apps, stuff runs like Discord. You don't need to worry about it as much. Proton works good enough for everything else, and then native Linux stuff works fine. And so we enter this world where, suddenly the operating system literally doesn't matter one iota.
Yeah. That seems like it's worse for Microsoft than anybody else at this stage.
And they helped build it.
Yeah.
Well, so to play Devil's Avocado, that's Gordon's phrase. Also, are these really gaming laptops? Like, should we really care about gaming? I mean, this is still a better gaming experience than a Mac, right?
I don't know, man.
Really? You think this is better than, like...
Look, the new Assassin's Creed's coming to Macs this year.
Oh.
Everybody's favorite.
Better,
oh, good.
I don't know. I mean,
but Mac compatibility, that's the joke, right? It's like, you want to play PC games? You got a Mac. You don't, then, you can't play your PC games.
Fair.
So, I mean, this is probably a better experience than that. No?
There is actually a better GPU acceleration experience for the applications that support it. Not necessarily games, but
I mean, but you have more games too,
maybe,
right?
No? I think I would agree that you basically have done it wrong both ways. If you bought a Mac or a Snapdragon X laptop, current form,
you shouldn't have been buying it for gaming. Yeah.
The clue should have been PC games, right? Because if you want to play PC games, it's still a 99% Windows world, right? So that's just it's just easier.
And x86,
it's just the way to go. And I agree with you that. And Adam is just kind of pulling your leg, because I always think that any focus on gaming is just an easy lose for Qualcomm at this point, because you'd have to be insane to buy a Qualcomm, Snapdragon laptop over an AMD or an Intel-based laptop for gaming. It just doesn't make any sense.
What if you have a 2-year-old brother printer, Gordon?
You can still run. I did it. I installed drivers for. I installed the Windows PCL drivers, PCL 6 drivers for my brother printer. But no, there's nothing native that runs at all on it. So, I also pointed. It's interesting. There's this tweet from Passmark Software. They make testing stuff out there that they've been around for a while, but I just thought this was a really interesting stat. It was like they basically said in the past 30 days, we've seen 22,000 x86 and Windows benchmark submissions versus 56 ARM Qualcomm Elite. That's 0.3% of all Windows benchmark submissions. Wow. Given that Qualcomm CEOs claim that ARM could capture 50% of the Windows PC market in 5 years, there's a long road ahead. So basically, ain't nobody buying these things, it looks like, that are running Passmark anyway.
Understand that most of my complaints here are the lens of looking through their own claims. They went on stage and said, we're going to launch 1,800 games, like esports titles. And if the Steam Deck can run games this well, surely the modern Snapdragon X could do this as well. Well,
I don't know. But to a certain degree, it does feel like a little bit, it's like, the Steam Deck came out and people were like, can I play Call of Duty? No. Can I play Destiny? No. Okay, that's cool. I love the Steam Deck. It's awesome. And then here they're like, can I play Call of Duty? No. Well, this thing's a piece of crap. Like I know it's not the same thing.
Like Cyberpunk.
I know. I know. It's not the same thing, but it also just feels a little different. Of like, like people are like, Steam Deck's awesome. But you can't do some of these things. It doesn't matter. It's awesome.
Here's the other thing, though. The Steam Deck costs $300. These are $1,000 laptops, right?
Plus.
Like my expectation for a $1,000 plus laptop is higher than it is for a $300 gaming device.
I know, but you're going to do way more with this laptop than just gaming. The Steam Deck is just a gaming device. Like, you shouldn't buy this just for gaming.
No, agreed. But like, I think what I'm saying is in the category of $1,000 plus laptops, I expect them to be more general purpose than I do. Like I expect it to be able to do basic stuff. If this was a $300 laptop and it didn't play games, I'm 100% on board with your argument. But when we're talking about a $1,000 premium laptop, it should be a competent computer for like the kind of things I do on if I want to play some Cyberpunk in my hotel room at night. Should be able to do that.
I don't know. I don't think the fact that the Steam Deck is $300 is an excuse to be like, oh, it's okay. It doesn't play these games because it's $300.
I'm saying outside of the world of the take the Steam Deck out of this conversation entirely. Different price. I'm saying if I'm comparing this to other $1,000 laptops, it should do the things other $1,000 laptops can do.
Yeah.
Not to mention you can do your taxes on your Steam Deck.
Look, we should just stop doing taxes. That's the real solution.
You can do taxes on a Qualcomm laptop. So I do think Wendell's got a really good point though, is because if you are making marketing claims and you have execs out there making these claims on stage and you're building expectations, and then we get around to the launch and all those kind of claims have sort of just vanished and they're not really making them anymore, then they definitely should be held accountable to that. But I would just be surprised if they would claim that they could run 1,800 games back then. But I guess, maybe it's,
Well, it depends on the list, yeah. If they're all like indie darlings.
StarCraft 2.
I mean, I will say I've like the Steam Deck. Like I'm not one of those people who are like, oh man, I cannot wait to play Cyberpunk on my Steam Deck. I know a lot of people do, but like I'm like, okay, well that's a big boy game. I'm gonna play it on a big PC, right? Like I like using the Steam Deck for casual games, Balatro, things like that. Like even when people are like, oh man, the Helldivers 2 runs horribly on the Steam Deck. It's like, well, yeah, I didn't expect it to run great, So for me, it's like expectation. So I've played plenty of casual games on here that I'm like, oh, okay, say I use this for work all day and it was great, or maybe I ran into a problem here and there, but the fire up Steam, play a casual game. Balatro played perfectly fine on this, and I was like, okay, that's maybe my expectations are down here, like, and sure they showed off Control and Cyberpunk, and yeah, that's their fault for setting expectations high, I think. But maybe if you start with low expectations, it's like, okay, well, this isn't that bad.
If you take $1,000 to Best Buy and you are sitting there looking at two different laptops, a Mac, an AMD $1,000 laptop,
that.
And one of these, and you buy this, and then you sit down next to a guy who has one of the other ones at the airport, and he's playing a real game, and you're playing Balatro. Are you going to be happy or sad?
I mean, like a thin and light Intel or AMD laptop.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still like I would not want to play Cyberpunk.
What if he's using Discord
on either of those? Yeah. No, Discord has definitely been hitchy. I'm not excusing it. It just like
I know
what I mean. Like it just feels, I don't know. It feels weird sometimes.
Scorpio in the chat, Scorpio896 asks, what about $1,000 plus iPad? Is that a good value?
Look, I can
Looking
draw
at Will.
on my
Looking at Will.
$1,000 iPad.
You playing Cyberpunk on that?
No. Well, look, I'll Steam Link over to the desktop. I'll play on that. That's fine.
I can do that
works.
too. It works over here.
Can you?
Yeah, actually you can.
Oh, yeah, you can for the desktop.
Yeah.
Who buys $1,000 iPads?
I did, but
I was like looking at Will.
everybody's pointing at me.
Was that $1,000?
It's an M2 Pro. It's $1,000. It was $1,000. It was $999, I think. Because it's the 250. I got storage. I got 256 gigs.
Are you playing Fortnite on it?
No, but like I'm not going to play Fortnite on a
See,
touch
it's
screen
your
ever.
expectations, right? Like that's why I'm like, okay, well, this is $1,000 too. That's $1,000. I feel like I could get way more out of this than that personally.
I wanted something I could take with me. I'm a desktop computer user. I'm a hardcore desktop. I don't need a I don't need a laptop.
I know.
I need something to sit on the couch and do the crossword on.
Yeah,
it's perfect for that. $1,000.
It's use
totally
cases,
reasonable
right?
price.
It's
I don't want to
use
hear from you
cases,
people.
Oh my God, that is. I just can't see any of these complaints about the Steam Deck pricing and having $1,000 iPad. That just feels like.
What do you think iPads cost, Gordon?
Well, that's why we don't. That's why we don't have
iPads.
That's why we
Gordon
don't have
is shrugging.
iPads. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should move on to the next thing because there's a lot more to talk about in this episode before Wendell turns into a pumpkin.
Yeah. So the next one, of course, is the topic that Wendell has been making the rounds on the internet. You can see him everywhere on his appearance here because it's something that everybody's been chasing for months and months and months now. But your data that you've gotten on the Intel CPU failures is quite different than what everybody else is seeing. And to me, it's an eye-opening problem because most of the problems that we've been trying to chase us down on, it's always desktop, it's always, X790 motherboards, X690 motherboards.
High-end stuff, yeah.
Very much consumer high-end gaming, platforms. You were seeing a massive amount of failures on workstation class motherboards, which is like what? And not exactly high strung parts either, right?
No, yeah. So understand that there's a lot. I really didn't expect the video that I did to get the legs that it did, but it was really just kind of the tip of the spear. And the message in that was not, oh my gosh, look at all these failures, but it was more, I think the data is out there. Look and see if you have the data. And we have like the Warframe devs and Alderon and a bunch of other game developers that popped up and said, oh yeah, we never really considered looking at the data that way. Let's look at the data that way. And then, oh, holy crap, there is actually a lot of errors from 13th and 14th gen Intel CPUs. They're disproportionately represented in our error logs. And so you have to understand that when I started this, it really started in like February. And I've been working on gathering information and stuff strictly from crash logs. And so most of the crash logs are consumer based. And the signal to the noise ratio, that's not anything that's not been in the news since last year even. The NVIDIA GPU driver error, and then a couple of months later, NVIDIA said, no, we think this is an Intel error in the nicest possible terms, is what they said. And then Intel was investigating, and they said, well, maybe this is a thermal velocity boost error. And so I was seeing a lot of the same kind of noise in the game crash data. It's like the giant elephant in the game crash data is, there's a lot of 13 to 1400K systems in here. But also, maybe those are just the most popular systems for gamers. Like that's the thing. Nobody has a Core 2 Quad Q6600 in there. There's a couple of those in there still, which is just wild.
Wow.
Somebody's played on that in the last 3 months. But, mostly you don't expect to see that, the data to be like that. And these tools, these game crash telemetry tools, they're not very good. They're not set up for the ways that you expect it. Like for example, most of the tools have some telemetry to report on your GPU, but most of them are not set up in the case where you have more than one GPU and your iGPU counts. And so if your primary GPU, like if you got your BIOS set for your iGPU to be your primary GPU and you boot off of that, then the thing that I get the easy way is the iGPU. And then I have to do all this extra work to figure out what GPU you really had because the game was running on the other GPU. And that's in like the crash dump, or I have to write a program to like go dig this out of binary. And they also don't, this is not the kind of thing that they want to give an internet rando or a YouTuber, because there's the customer's email address is in there typically, and their online account ID typically, and a lot of personal information. And so it's like, I'm not a rando. I mean, understand that I'm actually licensed and insured in case something happened with that data. I have an insurance policy to deal with that. And so there was a lot of like rigmarole and square dancing to go through and look at that. And because that was so bad, I was like, okay, is there another source of that? Like there's something going on, but there is also a lot going on the desktop side with BIOS updates and everything else. And then it occurred to me, there's probably data center sources of this. And then I started digging into the data center, and those people were just happy to have the help because it turns out they'd been suffering for a long time. And so, middle of January, into January, I was starting to get in contact with folks that way to look at their stuff, and we started gathering telemetry. And it turned out that one of the data center people had a mix of Z690 motherboards, but mostly W680 based motherboards. It's a completely different chipset. And they had gone through a round where a large number of their machines in 2023 had stability problems. And Intel had, or support, I don't know if it was Intel, it might be through their supplier, had swapped 13th gen for 14th gen CPUs because these systems were starting to push a year old, I guess. And they swapped 13th for 14th gen, but like in the case of like the ASRock W680, for example, they had a mix of ASRock, Asus, and Supermicro. And not a lot of ASRock boards, but a few. But the ASRock boards are really interesting. So in July of 2023, it's like the launch, the ASRock BIOS has different load line calibration for AC/DC, which is one of the changes that we saw in desktop boards. But by the November 2023 updates, the load line calibration in the BIOS was changed to be 1.1 mega ohm on the AC and the DC side. And that was in November of 2023. And that was also around the time that they were starting to do the CPU swaps for 13th to 14th gen. And then so fast forward to, over the last couple of months, starting to see failures on 14th gen where they can't run at the memory speed they had been running at. Or Linux ejects a core because the core is malfunctioning and the system continues on with 30 threads instead of 32 threads. Or the system crashes and does weird stuff unless you limit the multiplier. And you look at it and you look at all of the parameters and it's like, we're not experiencing this on 12th gen CPUs in roughly the same scenario. We're not experiencing this on older systems. And there's not nearly as many AMD 7000 series systems being used in this context in 2023, but those are not experiencing these same kind of problems either. And so what is going on with this?
Yeah, well, the first question somebody's asking is, hey, is this because it's an AMD sponsored game? Is AMD just going in here and just like wrecking all these Intel machines?
I don't. If that is, that's impressive. I mean, how do you do that? That's amazing. I don't actually know if I don't know. There's multiple. I have sources of data now from multiple games. I had 2 to begin with. And now I've got even more, and I have also 3 sets of usage from a data center context, and so some other game companies have gone on the record and as well with a similar thing. I think Warframe's breakdown is like, we just looked at everything in our crash database, and 13th and 14th gen they got a nice little pie chart representing that, and it's like, you can have the issue on i5 and i7, but it seems like it happens to a lesser extent, and it adds a lot of noise to the data, and so it's just like I want to cut. It's like even the desktop class chipsets add a lot of noise to the data, because there is something, I think, to the fact that desktop class motherboards are blasting their CPUs with the wrong voltage. And I think there is something to maybe with these CPUs over time degrade because something is happening with the CPU physically that it should not happen. But I think, the fix for Intel here is really pretty easy. You remember like the overclock warranties that they used to have is like a $20 thing or $50 thing, a one-time mulligans on your CPU. Like if you overclocked your CPU and you cooked it, you could do the overclock insurance. You could just do that.
Just give everybody basically free insurance for these parts, you think? Or make it available? Because to me, that's the real problem here is if people aren't going to pay for that $20 insurance, they just want to feel that their i9s are going to last. That if the thing gives up the ghost in 3 years from now, they're not going to be stuck trying to buy one on eBay to make it work.
Yeah, and that maybe is like 3 years of overclock insurance or whatever it was. They used to do that on the like the 7th, 8th, and 9th generation, and they did it on the X299 parts as well. It's like you get a one-time mulligan. And then it's like if that one dies, you're on your own. But you get a one time, no questions asked. We replaced it, kind of a thing. But the really crazy thing with this is that as I was doing testing, half of the CPUs are fine. And understand that when I say that the other half of the CPUs are not fine, most of those, well, at least half of those, probably would be fine in a desktop context. And what I mean by that is when I'm running the test window that I set up is 168 hours long, which is a week. And on the best of those CPUs that still are in the fail bucket, you get one error. And so you would hardly notice if the error occurs in a non-fatal way. Like if it occurs outside of kernel process space, or like if it's part of a game texture or whatever, it's like, something funny happened. Like sometimes you're playing a game and something has like a texture that is misaligned, or there's like a pixel out here, and so it has this weird triangle shape. That's happening in your GPU memory. Your GPU memory got something a little wrong, or the vertex was miscomputed. A single failure like that, if you're just running this on like Windows or a desktop, it's like the browser tab crashed. You'd hardly know that anything was wrong in a desktop computer context. But in a server context where things are tracked a little bit more, you notice. Maybe if you have error correcting memory, sometimes some of these systems have error correcting memory. Not all of them that I have data for, which I really think is a problem. And not all of these were using error correcting memory, but a good portion of them were. And in a lot of those cases, if you back off the multiplier, or if you limit the DDR speed to be like 5200 instead of 5600, which Intel says should officially work, the problems go away. So it'll pass the 168-hour window, whereas before it might have had one or two errors. There's a small set of CPUs where Linux will pretty consistently eject a core, and it'll say, this core is malfunctioning. I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to turn it off and continue on. It'll limp along. Linux has some features in it to do that. Sometimes it'll crash. Sometimes you'll get a kernel panic. Sometimes it'll crash so bad that the BIOS resets. That happens a lot on the Asus W680. A lot of the time they deal with an unknown situation by just dropping the memory speed to 3600, no matter how much, what kind of memory you have. And they're just like, hey, something weird happened. Press F1 to continue. So then you have to, like, when you're dealing with it remotely in a data center, you have to go somewhere else to deal with that situation because it doesn't auto recover. Very frustrating. And so I didn't have enough access to do that. I had to wait on other people to do that. So sometimes when that would happen, I'd have to wait on a few days on somebody to go fix something for me. And so I discovered a lot of really interesting things like that, and a lot of really interesting quirks. And there are differences in the way that ASRock, Supermicro, and Asus handle their CPUs and the defaults and blah, blah, blah. But just random lottery, it's a coin toss. It's like, if I can get a CPU to throw an error or not in that 168-hour window, about half of them, I could get an error. I would say probably like 10, 15% are error often enough as to be something that I would not want to use, period. So maybe it's a thing where you can recover the ones on the edge through a firmware update, or a firmware microcode update, or a BIOS update, or changing some settings, or lowering a voltage or something. But some of them, they're going to have to be replaced.
And you're saying in a workstation server capacity.
Right, yeah.
Oh, okay,
Well,
yeah. Like you wouldn't trust it there, but for gaming desktop usage, like it'd be a little bit different.
Of the half that have problems, no more than half of that maybe would be okay in a desktop context. Maybe.
What's your sample size here, Wendell?
All told, I've looked at 210 machines insanely closely, but the population size is like 2,800, 2,900. Okay.
So I had one of these 13900Ks. I've had two, actually, because I had one that I built in November of 2022, I think. And then it started getting hinky in March or April of the next year, and I RMA'd, and it was the same. That one was a memory controller. Clearly, was not liking the speed memory we put in that machine. The second one, I got the series of random crashes in games, like the shader decompression errors. I got EAC and Fortnite would trigger, thinking I'd been doing memory writes as memory corruption was coming in. And that was indicated by just black screen crashes to desktop with no crash noted in the Fortnite log, the Unreal Engine log, to the point that like Epic banned me because they thought I was cheating. Like they gave me a permanent ban, which was fun. I had to make some. Luckily, I was able to make some calls to some friends who work over there and were like, "Hey, I assure you, I'm not cheating, sir."
Literally had a call with that on the game provider. I was showing them. I was like, "What is this? Is this supposed to be like this?" And they're like, "Oh crap, we're gonna have to roll back a bunch of bans." And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah." And so that was the direction they went in after I was showing them stuff.
Yeah, the EAC ban, because it was, just to be clear, on the Fortnite side, it was nasty because it was like, "Hey, you've been banned permanently. This is irrevocable, and there's nothing you can do to kind of appeal this decision." So anyway, they rolled it back. It was fine, but I'm glad I was not a normal person in that case. Like I'm glad I knew people who worked at Epic and was able to call.
Lucky.
I know. The experience though was, hey, if I clock it down to 53 and then finally 52, a 52 multiplier, it was pretty okay. But it was still janky in a way that I don't expect a modern computer to be, even with the like you said, tabs crashing, WHEA errors occasionally showing up in the event log. There were definitely some bellwethers, but the first thing that showed up was always the anti-cheat memory detecting changes, writes to memory that it didn't acknowledge, and then crashing the game to prevent you from hacking the game. And I'm curious if you saw any of that stuff with the BattleEye or with if you looked at EAC.
Yeah, that from the game logs, I'm not deep enough in the game developer ecosystem to be like, oh yeah, this is definitely like an EAC type crash versus a regular crash. But for the vast majority of crashes that occurred, it was like memory read or memory incompatibility type errors. For the Linux testing that I did, I set up testing specifically to test directly from CPU cache. So I've got a small enough program that runs almost entirely from the CPU cache. It never touches main memory. It should never touch main memory, basically. And I would still see huge failures, huge failure rates. But also memory operations, that does seem to factor into it. Surprisingly, eCores, like the tech team that was handling it on the other side, they had months of notes from where they were dealing with it on the 13th gen that they forwarded me. And so some of this is, I'm trusting their information from 2023 even. And memory factored into it. And for them, they said somewhat disabling eCores on the 13th gen helped them. That's the one thing that I do not agree with on their assessment, is that generally in like almost all the cases across the whole population, it was I just took a random sample of 200 machines from one provider and put it all together. And in like maybe 5 of those, disabling the eCores was something that actually improved stability. Mostly it was multiplier limiting and controlling the memory speed and making the memory speed dog slow. And some of that, if you look at the Intel specifications for this, their CPUs officially in the specification, if you are running 2 DIMMs in a dual rank configuration, that is a 3600 MT DDR5 situation, which most people don't realize. But yeah, so it's like, fortunately, that particular provider is running 1 DIMM per channel. The other 10 or so machines that I looked at in another context, those were all 2 DIMM per channel. And so that's why it was like, well, I'm going to get some data from these, but 2 DIMM per channel is a whole other ball of wax. And it's like if you wanted to run 2 DIMMs with DDR5, I don't think I'm going to trust that in a server context, which again is kind of like a bombshell thing that I don't really want to officially on the record say. But 2 DIMMs being the source of the problem, even at like 4,400, that's unsettling when we're talking about 64 and 128 gigabytes of total system memory.
Well, consumer side, it's really gnarly given how memory bandwidth dependent performance in Unreal is, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so for the type of errors you're talking about, yes, exactly those errors in a different context. And I really laser focused on them on the Linux side, and I was able to do amazing things with reproducible-ish errors, reproducible random errors. That's the other wild thing in contexts that would absolutely freak out an easy anti-cheat type program.
Well, so the other interesting thing to me was that EAC would detect these errors and bomb out reliably after like 3 Fortnite games at the most, where I could consistently pass on the exact same settings, mem test, torture test, OCCT, memory test, stuff like that, with flying colors over and over again. And it makes me wonder if the things that I had treated as gold standard for stability testing need to be reconsidered in the modern context with the new, more complicated processors and architectures.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of what is biting Intel in the butt here, is that they're going through OCCT and everything else to try to do the testing. There was a decent number of CPUs that, in addition to having other stability issues, the issues were just around I/O. And there were a couple of CPUs. Now, understand in the server context, there are no GPUs attached to them. The only I/O I've got to work with is network and NVMe. And that was like all of February's misery and suffering was helping the provider understand that once we had visibility on PCIe errors, that a lot of the errors were just Samsung's fault, because Samsung has a history of doing weird stuff when the PCIe bus sleeps. And so that was a lot of noise that was unnecessary suffering and work that I had to deal with.
Samsung NVMEs, just to drill down.
Yeah. They have PCIe. They generate a lot of PCIe AER errors, which are not actually errors. It's just from how they go to sleep and wake. And there are firmware updates to fix that. And most motherboards will just disable PCIe error reporting because we don't want to freak out the users. And so you see that, and you won't see it in WHEA or anything else. But if you turn that on, or if you have a Samsung NVMe and you see a bunch of those, you might actually need a firmware update because it makes it hard to find which of the AER errors were uncorrected because the you could have 40,000 errors and every one of them is corrected. But when your computer is generating that WHEA error, it actually will mess with like your DPC latency, for example. It can mess with all of those things as the system is like, oh, I just had an error. Do I have to like stop everything and deal with that? Oh, no, it's cool. It's just this device didn't wake from sleep. And it'll continue on. It won't crash. But when you're doing something like playing a game or trying to keep tick rates thing, or easy anti-cheat is trying to measure how much time something took, it absolutely will cause problems with all of those things. And so it was a bit of a red herring on the data center side because none of those things might have been causing problems for like world tick rate inside the game engine. But were not actually problems with the CPU. But then we got all that fixed and all the firmware is up to date and all the BIOS is updated and all the stuff. And then it's like, okay, we're still seeing PCIe errors on some of these systems. And so that's a completely different clock domain. So like even with running it at fixed 4.8 gigahertz and 3600 memory, we still get PCIe errors and they're just random. This CPU is broken.
Falcon Northwest is in the chat. Hello, and it says, please remind folks to update to the latest BIOS. Asus just got their 700 series chipset BIOS fixes out this weekend. 600 series still not 100% fixed. For the average user on the desktop here, like what are your recommendations?
If you have a 12th, 13th, or 14th, update your BIOS ASAP. If you have a Samsung NVMe, update ASAP. And Falcon Northwest also says everyone running a 2+-year-old's 980 M.2, update your firmware. It is critical. He's not kidding.
Yes.
Not kidding.
Probably back up before you do an NVMe firmware update, just in general principle.
Yes. Very, very much so.
Also,
I have a...
Well, real quick, somebody asked earlier, I can't find them. PR Frag asks, did you share this info with Intel?
Yes, actually. So the people that need it are not allowed to directly talk to media. And I have another path that just popped up for sending that info. And so I've already sent one of the serial numbers of a CPU that actually died while I was testing it. In case that helps with batch or anything else. A couple of the data center contacts are actually mailing me stuff. So I'm like systems that I've only worked on remotely are now they're just like, here, we're done. Here, you have parts. Which ones do you want? And it's like, oh, I want system 37. I want number 19. I want number 147. Because they're all doing interesting stuff. And those are on their way. They've started to show up. I've got a 13700T in that data set, and I think that one is probably going to be of particular interest to Intel. So I still have information to gather and send. But again, the message for me for my video was there are larger game companies like Warframe and everything else out there, and it's up to them what they want to share or not want to share, but it's in their database. They've never maybe thought about it in these terms. Publish the database because the data is there. Like, it doesn't have to go through me. I'm just one internet rando. They have the data. So it's like, if I see this and I'm an internet rando searching for this stuff, then there are probably millions of data points, which will probably help Intel solve this. So just look at it in those terms. Somebody tweeted at me that was like, oh yeah, I never thought about looking at the crash, because I had to marry the analytics database. Like, the crash database doesn't even have all the stuff that I need. I had to then get the tech team to go to the marketing team to be like, can we get access to the game's marketing database to know how many people launched it and what their system config was and stuff like that? Because they didn't have that. And I didn't even get that until March. So,
well, and do you think that like Intel doesn't know what's going on still, and that's why they haven't said, "Hey, we're going to make this good"? If you have an affected processor, is that too big a jump?
Let's. I mean, I really don't understand why it's not. If you got, if you're having problems and we're sure it's a CPU, here's a utility that'll tell you for sure if it's CPU. If that is, I don't know if we can do that. Here's your path to getting an RMA. That buys a lot of goodwill, and it takes a lot of the uncertainty. The uncertainty here is what's driving everybody insane. It's not actually that there's a problem. There's a problem, it's a problem. But the uncertainty is a bigger problem than the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that have taken it and run with it to be like, oh my gosh, everything is broken. And it's like,
And I'm never buying Intel again, only AMD.
yeah, like keep in mind that I think this is a relatively large sample size. It feels like a large sample size because it's been like it's splinter in my brain for a long time. But most of them, almost most of them, not quite most of them, are fine. And that is the other thing that makes me think there's something wrong with, and so is this, I don't have the data on like Xeon W2400. I probably could get access to Xeon W2400. That's another conversation. But for the other ones, could you fix it with microcode? Could you look at microcode like we have AVX and it's like, oh, this is doing an AVX decompression type thing, or oh, this is an easy anti-cheat type operation. You can look at that in microcode and you can say, we're going to run the CPU at 5 gigahertz because we're doing easy anti-cheat stuff. I think that's fine. But will gamers lose their mind if they lose any performance? Because what if the fix is we can't run it at 6 gigahertz, we got to run it at 5.8? People will lose their mind and that won't look good.
I mean, losing my Fortnite account felt pretty bad too, for what it's worth.
Well, but also, I mean, it's the way the CPU was marketed was, hey, hit 6 gigahertz, So
You're screwed no matter what. To me, that's the real scary thing in all this is that it was clearly marketed at a certain clock speed, at a certain power envelope. And that is, everybody can tell you if you can't actually, if those chips are actually, if they're finding those chips are not able to actually live long enough at those speeds, then you've got a major problem. And you know that there will be a lawyer knocking on your door any day now, because
in a data center context, like half of them seem fine, so you just get them, like everybody gets 2.
I've had 2. It wasn't great. Less of a fan.
That's the other scary thing is, like, they said they would have a better idea at the end of June, right? It's the middle of July now, and they're still working on it. So, like, they are still working on it and nobody knows. And it's just funny because I think that the fact that your information comes out now is it's like somebody filling in the other side of the envelope now. It's like, oh, this feels like a totally different animal than what people have been filling in the other side of the envelope. The old.
For the leads that I got, I definitely had to cut through a lot of vitriol and frustration because these are customers that are buying thousands of CPUs that are very, very frustrated. And normally they're not supposed to talk to somebody like me about anything. And it's surprising that some of the things that I found, just in terms of like, well, this isn't obvious. Like, did nobody at Intel tell you about the whole Samsung thing? Because, like, clearly, if you sent them the logs, they saw the PCIe errors. So why wouldn't they say, because it's not an Intel error. There's nothing. It's a Samsung thing, but not the root problem, but maybe contributing. Kind of like the motherboard things, like Z690. The Z690, the motherboard stuff, definitely a contributing factor because the more voltage, more death. Probably. I mean, I don't know, but like the i5 and the i7 seem to die at a less ridiculous rate. And it's also true that, like, if you limit the multiplier, that boost voltage, I guess, like 1.6, 1.5, 1.6 voltage, like if that is a dangerous voltage, you're going to see that voltage way less when you've limited the multiplier to 52 or 53, which is, if that's blasting something or causing electromigration and that happens less, then your CPU lasts longer. Okay. I think the panic button inside some of these larger providers too was this is how the 13th gen problems started to manifest. And then we're starting to see the same kind of problems with 14th gen after 6 months, 8 months in, a 24/7 workload scenario. That's got to be worrying if you've bought millions of dollars of product.
Right.
So the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of gamers is like, oh nope, I'm just buying AMD, never getting Intel again. Right. What's the feeling on the server side? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of frustration. Obviously, it's big money. Like, are they also being like, nope, we're going AMD?
There are large providers that we've all heard of that their sales team is actively recommending AMD, just as like we think you should buy this for this scenario. Now, understand this is still a very niche use case. Most people are on Xeon or Epic. They want to buy Xeon or they want to buy Epic. Almost nobody, which is still millions of customers, is buying these kinds of CPUs, Ryzen 7000 or Intel. And maybe the run up over the last 12 months of people buying Ryzen 7000 in a data center context is what led to what I saw at Computex in June of 2024 with so many people buying AM4. And AMD is like, I don't know why we are selling so many Ryzen 7000 CPUs to these data center customers. This is wild. And they just didn't put it together and like, oh, let's just brand it Epic. So because people want this for the data center. Okay, makes sense. Now, maybe this is the other side of the coin, is that for these niche use cases where you just want a low number of threads at a ridiculous clock speed and you don't want to pay $1 zillion for the socket, AMD 7000 series gets it done and at a better power envelope. So yeah, there's at least a couple instances. I did a call where they were negotiating to buy $100,000 a gear, and they were like, "Oh yeah, no, let's talk 7950X. Let's not." And it literally costs an extra $1,000 if you were going to go the Intel route, and that extra $1,000 was not there a year ago. Like in terms, like this same kind of negotiation was going on in like this October, I think, of last year. Don't quote me on that, but it was like sometime last year, and they sent me the quotes from then. And the pricing was basically the same; it had gone up a little bit, but the support was now $1,000 instead of like 140 or 150 or whatever it was. And it's like, what's up with that? It's like, oh yeah, you should just buy AMD. All right.
Oh, so the AMD machines didn't have the extra $1,000 support cost on them, is what you're saying?
No, They were the same price last year as yeah. And then, and it was like, why? It was like we bought systems last year. What happened? Oh yeah, this is what happened. Like, oh, that's interesting.
Do any of you think this is actually to the point where we're damaging the brand at this point? Because again, this is something that's been cooking for half a year now, more than half a year. Mostly game forums originally. Is it to the point where the average buyer, the average gamer, Intel's name has always been gold, right? Is it to the point where you think we're going to see people say, you know what, I'm going to skip in this generation? Is it that bad, or is this something that is still seen as a fairly small outlier?
I think people have had enough bad experiences with either team, which is, maybe directly or indirectly or not their fault, that I don't think it'll really matter. I've seen some crazy stuff, and I've seen some really I'm disappointed in humanity and looking at some of the support tickets inside some of these games. There was more than one support ticket, but there's one in particular that I got there okay to talk about on camera in any context. And it was, the dude was saying, my computer is perfectly stable. And it's like, yes, I'm running, my overclocked memory and whatever. But your game is the only game that doesn't work. But if in Windows I run it in compatibility mode, it works. And compatibility mode disables like AVX and a bunch of other things. And so the game works, but the performance is terrible. And they were like, you should fix your game. This is your game. And it was absolutely not the game. It was, but they had opened a ticket with support, and support was talking to them when we were looking at their crash dumps. And it was just like, this is like, you're going to have to lower the multiplier on your CPU. It's like, oh yeah, that did fix it, but I don't want to run that because it's only your game that doesn't work. And it's like, wow, that's dark.
I mean, just having been in that spot, not that I opened support tickets with people and we were arguing with them, but having been in the spot where I was like, what is happening? At the time you crank the multiplier down and it suddenly starts working again, I just felt relief at that point that like I found something that would solve the problem, at least even in the short term. I think to me, the fact that the data center people are having problems is the thing that if I was Intel, I would be freaked out about now. Like ultimately the consumer enthusiast market is like a blip on a blip for Intel, but hey, the big data centers are recommending that we buy AMD instead of Intel. Seems like something that I would be worried about if I was Intel and had access to spreadsheets, right?
It's still a blip on a blip, even in a data center context, because most of the time you want a data center CPU. The other thing that is maybe driving these kinds of CPUs in the data center is the power density and like power versus physical volume, because a lot of the OG data centers are not designed for, a modern AI rack is 80 kilowatts in a rack with liquid cooling and everything else, which is insane. And there's a lot of data centers, older data centers out there that they've only been able to retro convert up to like 20 or 25 kilowatts from an original design. If their building was built, 20 years ago, it might be like 10 or 15 kilowatts a rack. And they've been able to upgrade and do everything. They pull out all the stops and they can get to like a max of 40 kilowatts a rack.
And this is for like a 40U, 42U rack, standard 42U rack.
Yeah. And AM5 and to a lesser extent, AM5 and Xeon 2400 are a great choice. And to a lesser extent, high density, lower power CPUs like single socket Bergamo or the new Xeon 6 are a good choice for approaching data centers that need that kind of that have that kind of power constraint. Facebook pretty famously is very power constrained in their data centers. And so this is a pretty good option for those that doesn't involve AMD having or Intel having to open up really a lot more swim lanes. Because you also don't want to have these insanely dense systems necessarily when you've got this hodgepodge of customers. Because if one of these game companies could run 50 game servers on one of those 144 core Xeon 6s or a Bergamo, assuming that it had the single thread clock speed, which you wouldn't want to run a game server on that for that reason. But if there's other stuff that would work fine on that scenario, but you wouldn't want to do that because when that one system dies, it's going to affect such a huge number of customers that you're just like, no, we just 16 cores with a ridiculous clock speed and a low power envelope is like the best of all worlds. We don't care that it physically takes up a lot of space.
Interesting.
Okay.
Look, this just makes me want that data center simulator manager game even more.
Yes. Exactly.
Is that a real thing?
No, nobody makes that.
Yeah.
We have power wash simulator, we have lawn mowing simulator, we have house repair simulator, we have my sim car. I want build a data center. It's like a building Factorio.
Make it, Will. Make it. Make it happen.
It's
crazy.
Somebody
that
write me
kind
a
of
check.
exists in the metaverse and with NVIDIA. Like they were planning some new. Was it OVH or somebody at GTC? They were like, yeah, we planned a data center in the Omniverse or whatever.
Oh boy,
the
really?
metaverse,
Oh,
whatever NVIDIA's thing was.
In this game, would you have to deal with political instability, like fabs? The nuclear power threatens fabs to attack countries. So, like, suddenly you have to you didn't put your orders in, and then you have. Would that be part of your game? Because that'd be kind of fun.
There's a typhoon and all the hard drive production got wiped out for 6 months. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. All right. Is there any other takeaways from this that you want to help inform people on? What should people be feeling right now? Because I feel like a lot of people are like scared. Wendell?
No, I don't. Scared is probably not the right reaction. I think that it would be nice if we had more complete tooling for identifying, what level of degradation you have and what you run into. Because for most of the testing that I got to the point where I could do it with just Y cruncher and a couple shell scripts. And so I can tell you if a CPU is likely to fail within 24 hours as opposed to 168 hours. And you could boot from a Linux ISO and just you could try to run Y cruncher, which is the worst power virus imaginable. And keep an eye on your temperatures and that kind of thing. And if Y cruncher is stable, I will be surprised if you have other stability issues, but you can totally have other stability issues. Like you were saying, everything is fine except for easy anti-cheat. And it's that is a thing that I encountered too, is Y cruncher was fine, but then I go to just unzip a zip file that uses, AVX or whatever, and it just dies every single time on a different core. How does this even happen?
Yeah, that was I went through an isolated cores to see if there was one core that was bad, and it would do the same crash. Which makes me think it's something in the glue that holds the cores together and not the cores themselves.
Glue. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's CPU glue.
Yeah. I went down a rabbit hole adjusting the ring bus speeds, and then that worked for some CPUs, and I was like, yes, okay, let's do it across all of them. I really expected the reason that I worked for so long in so many machines, and I'd have to work on them in batches too. I couldn't just take all the machines offline and then just
wow, jeez.
But I really expected that I would find one thing that was broken, and then I could come out and be like, look, I figured it out. And the video was really just admitting my failure. Like, haven't figured it out. There's something wrong. There's something in the data, but I'm going to need more data to know what's going on. But also, like, game crash data is terrible because survivorship bias, like you were saying, and because if it crashes really bad, you don't know. If it just goes to a black screen, there's nothing in the logs. You don't know. But then it was, where else can you go to get the data? And the data is out there. It's like the truth is out there. The data is out there. So it has nothing to do with me. It's just go get the data. Like, let's publish the data.
Well, the crash to desktop with anti-cheat, I had to talk to a friend who actually works on anti-cheat in games. And he was like, yeah, often if an anti-cheat detects a cheat, it's going to crash without an error message because it doesn't want to give the people who are cheating an error message that indicates that we detected that they were cheating. And I was like, well, this isn't very helpful for me right now, but thank you. This is much needed clarity.
So do you think this is what's going on over at Intel as well? Why they're taking, the time they need to get the information out there? Or because a lot of people are like, oh no, they're just stalling and they're waiting for people to, for this to blow by.
They either know what it is and it's really bad because the fix is not going to be easy, and they're scared to death some rando is going to figure it out, or they genuinely have no idea. And it's probably a combination of issues is what it feels like, because things like the 13700T having issues, like, I mean, I guess, but if you do the math, like the 13700T, it's like 66 or 60, it's like 66.7 watts if the 13700T is boosting on one core under the 2023 Intel power profile. Is that a high enough voltage to cause degradation? And it's pretty close. So, and that's just one core on it, even though it's a 35 watt part. And so it's like, well, maybe it is voltage related. But if it's a combination of issues like, oh, the ring bus degrades when this microarchitectural condition occurs inside the CPU, then yeah, it's really hard to troubleshoot that kind of stuff. Intel has this great errata page where they publish their errata for a CPU, and it's like, oh, this we got a fix for this, we don't have a fix for that. If you look through most of those, most of them are just really insanely obscure stuff, and it's like, how did they find this? Most of them are labeled no fix, which is interesting, but most of them are really absurdly obscure things. And so if Intel's in a position to figure that out, they'll probably figure this out. But the uncertainty, I think, is what's driving everybody insane versus everything else.
Well, yeah, that and the lack of clear information, because it leaks out, and then it turns out the leaks were not quite right, and then we go back and forth. I'm just kind of wondering at what point that the end user, because obviously there's a difference for data center customers or for a game company running servers, but at what point is the patience done? Because at this point it feels like we're getting to the point where people are only going to get more and more nervous because we're not hearing what the actual issue is, and then it does make you think this is like one of those, oh shit, we've got to recall X amount of CPUs, which is going to materially affect the bottom end, right? And I don't know what the answer is, but it feels like people are not happy at this point, and I don't know what can make anybody happy. And it feels like they got to be a little more upfront about, like, hey, we are working on this, because we know that people, they think that, we're coming up with whatever other ideas for how we're going to fix this, but it feels like they need to be able to communicate a little bit more about this at this point, because it's this like, is like, I think we're like one step away from, you know what, I'm skipping your next chip, because I don't know if that's, if this is what we saw at 13 and 14 gen, then maybe it's best I go A and B this time, right? So
the data center people, I think this is almost a direct quote, are happy that I have stopped the bleeding, because the updated BIOS power configuration, multiplier limit 54, and then specific rules around RAM configuration, mostly sticking to 2 by 48 gig DIMMs, 96 gigs total, and that's just the max you can order on a configuration, has made them have enough working systems that don't crash, that they're like, oh, thank goodness, because they have obligations they have to meet for their customers. And so they have been, I felt very appreciated, let's say, for those, there's enough of those working systems in that configuration with the 54 multiplier limit, and like 53, 54, and that their people can go do that. And I'm not doing anything with that, and they can take care of their customers. So I think the data center people are perfectly happy to run at not 6 gigahertz. But I don't think gamers, with gamers, it's going to be more of a bloodbath.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you have to tell people they got to give up 200 megahertz, even though they never run it 6 gigahertz, they'll be held to pay. So I don't know how you get out of that unless
you got clear messaging that's like, here's the plan for making you whole. It seems easy.
Right. Yeah, well, we fixed it. We know what it is. We're going to extend a warranty. We're going to give you these parts. Then I think people will be like, okay, I'm cool. But other than that, anything short of that, it feels like, oof.
I mean, in fairness, like we're not even to the end of the 13900K warranty if you bought one on launch day, right? It's a 3-year warranty typically. They've been pretty good about RMAs from everything I've heard from other people. Like there was no fuss. I had a new chip in like 2 days when I did the RMA on mine. They didn't even ask for logs or anything. It was like, hey, it's crashing in this circumstance. And they're like, okay, send it in. We'll send you a new one. The question gets more intense as we approach October of 2025, which is when we hit 3 years for those chips. And I think, I would be more concerned if I was still running one of those at that point.
Well, but we all expect to buy a CPU and then run it for a decade, right? I don't think anybody would be happy to say like, oh, well, you got your full 3 years of warranty out of it. So I don't think that's gonna solve any problems for anybody. So,
well, we gotta get out of here.
Sorry, I like to ramble.
Yeah. No.
Talks,
I mean, good talks. Do you got time for a couple rapid fire questions, or we need to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Friend of the show, Eternal Duo A, asks, given that we're seeing reportedly anemic performance improvement, but quite a large change in L1 and L2 cache size, I think they're referring to Zen 5. Are we nearing the end of cache increases helping performance? L3 seems like a much bigger deal.
Time will tell. We got to go if it's Zen 5 related, we got to go hands on. I think there's still a lot of opportunity for cache structure to improve performance. There's still a lot of wild computer science things happening. Like it turns out that in Linux, a linked list is worse for performance than red-black trees, which computer science students will say, wait a minute, that's an O1 algorithm versus an ON algorithm or an N squared. And so, and it turns out it's because memory access patterns. So the tree is better than the linked list because the linked list is just a random access pattern, whereas the tree is different and better for prefetching. So cache can still cause a lot of performance uplift.
Okay. Here we go. Does Pat Gelsinger? This is from friend of the show, Sneaky. Does Pat Gelsinger still believe that AMD is in Intel's rear view mirror?
Who was it that said that might indicate they're driving the car the wrong way? Somebody said that, and I thought that was kind of. I think AMD for their part, they seem to very much be taking the don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake move, and they're just sort of letting Intel. Intel's got their strategy and they're doing their thing. And from what I can tell, AMD is just staying the course and being a boring execution machine in the best possible sense of that description.
Okay. All right. Last question. This is very pointed, but it's a friend of the show, Cause MC. So I want to help them out. They have a game building test server configuration thing. Anyway, currently running a 3900X with 32 gig workstations and a 1800X 64 gig server. So workstation server. Trying to figure out the best upgrade path cycle that I have, considering replacing the 1800X server with an Epic Naples 7532 or moving my 3900X to my server and get a 7900X for workstation. Any suggestions?
The second scenario is definitely the better scenario. That Epic Naples is still Zen 1. It's a bit of a lateral movement. I think the 3900X is probably a better bet, and you will be surprised how much of a difference you experience moving from the 3900X to anything in the 7000 series, especially for that workload.
Okay. And one more last question, Turtle Duo A again. Regarding Intel crashing, is there any data on the difference between DDR4 and DDR5? that you've been seeing?
Don't have enough data to say if DDR4, you're talking about with like LGA 1700 degradation. I looked for that. I tried to find a source of people using DDR4 at scale, and I don't have the data for that. There is some like teasing that out of the crash data was borderline impossible. But I think that mostly the 13th and 14th gen, my assumption is the 13th and 14th gen is all DDR5, but I don't know that to be true. And it was very like spot checking the records, DDR5. But in terms of like every data point that went into the aggregate, for sure DDR5, not the case. So I don't believe the DDR4 on 13th or 14th gen is prevalent in the crash data that I have based on a small random sampling. But I could be completely wrong about that. So DDR4 or 5 may or may not be a factor.
Wow. Okay. Cool. That was rapid fire, Wendell. I love
also remember 12th gen has a different, I believe, a different memory controller than 13th and 14th gen, which, you know, in terms of like, oh, did we make an architectural mistake?
Ooh. Hey, they'll upgrade everybody to 12th gen parts that they have sitting around, right? So, 12900K. I had a 14900K. That's not going to work.
The incidence of crashes based on the marketing analytics data, the number of people that have an i7, 13.7, and 14.7, that is lower. I think. Don't quote me on that. Actually, I might be wrong about that because I peeled the i7s away a lot, but the rate of crashes per unit i7 in the population, the crash rate is lower on those CPUs for this data, but not zero.
Okay. Right.
Ooh,
Cool.
Boy.
Yeah.
Never ending.
Man, so much to talk about. So much stuff. That is why I love having Wendell on. Wendell's
It's great.
Awesome. Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
And or fun times.
Yeah.
No, it's good because
No, only fun times. Yeah. When Wendell's
I think
here.
it's awesome too because it is one of those things that, you know, it is part of what the job the media can do is we put pressure on the vendors because the more people are talking about it, the more bad headlines there are, the bad news there is. They want to get this behind them. So I know there's people who think that they are not taking this seriously or they've got all these kind of conspiracy theories, but you know, I don't actually think they are, but I think it does keep pressure on them. I think it helps move things along of like, if suddenly everybody stopped talking about this and didn't talk about it for 6 months, you could definitely see it changing somewhat of the answer, but I think the answer at this point, nothing less than, you know, showing us everything that went wrong and making people whole is the only thing that's going to fix it. So I think this is very, very important. I think you've done a wonderful service with all your numbers.
That is very kind, and it means quite a lot coming from you. So I greatly appreciate that.
It's wonderful to have something that's not just anecdote, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because that's everybody. Because everybody only has a sample of one for the most part. I mean, you're lucky if you have a sample of two, but you had quite a few samples, so that's.
Yeah, and also when I walked into that, it was like, you've been working on this how long? Like, what now? And then you dig into it, and it's like, yeah, this has actually been in the news. Like, I hadn't realized that NVIDIA had actually issued some stuff to the media to say, yeah, it's not a game driver crash.
Yeah.
And then it also felt like the floodgates opened when the game companies themselves actually want to publish their data. You know, it's just like the first person, like I was just the not even really first to just be like, hey, you got the data, publish the data. Don't listen to me. Go look at the data.
It never would have occurred to me to call a game developer and be like, hey, can you give me your crash database? Because you know, like, props to you, Wendell, for that. That was a big ask.
A lot of human suffering in that database.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, it's been a trickle, right? Because NVIDIA did the thing last year. Oodle and Rad Game Tools did their thing last year. And then people started posting hey, if you're having crashes, maybe clock down to 53x and see if that helps. And then people started taking it seriously. So props.
Yeah. It's going to be wild if when Intel comes out with it, it turns out the reason that going down to 53 was not just going down to 53, but because that was limiting voltage. Like, I don't know. I don't even suspect that. I have no business speculating. All I can do is tell you, like, for this population, it helped.
There you go.
Sorry, last question. Do you? What's your follow up on this? What can people expect when they subscribe over at Level 1 Techs?
Oh, I did a video with Steve at Gamers Nexus. He has the ball. He is running with the ball. He is fixated tenaciously on that ball.
Oh, good.
And he's got a really amazing lead, and he's currently investigating that. And you should definitely check that out or be on the lookout for that. I'm physically gathering these machines that I've been tickling for months are starting to arrive in my office. And I
want to tickle them physically.
Yeah, I can tickle them physically, and I especially want to get the 13700T. And I'm sort of back channeling some of this data to Intel or people inside Intel that maybe can do something useful with it. I can't just turn over the game. Like, I'm not authorized to turn over the game crash database and do that kind of thing, but I might be able to do aggregate exports or things like that. But even stuff like dumping the CPU serial number, like that's a thing you can do. But a lot of these BIOSes actually mask the CPU serial number. So like if you use like CPU ID on Linux, you just get the same CPU serial number on all the systems. So it's not. That's why it's like there are some things you can do physically. You can turn that off and go, but it's a whole other thing. So yes, more stuff is coming. There is more interesting stuff in the data. There's a lot of noise in the data that I just sort of swept aside because it's like I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about that. I've only got access to like 50 13700Ts. I don't have a lot of those, and the failure rate is much lower. It's still non-zero, but it's much lower. And it's much lower than 50%. It's more like 20%, 25%, maybe ish.
Wow.
I don't know.
All right.
Stay tuned. More coming.
More coming. Crazy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendell.
You want to take us out?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, everybody. Check back next week for your fix of PC Talk on the Full Nerd. For audio listeners, subscribe to us on iTunes, Pocket Cast, or Spotify. And if you're on one of those services, please leave a review. Every time you do, Wendell gets access to somebody's server logs. So
yes, leave a review. We want that. Maybe he might
send
not.
Send questions and comments to thefullnerd@PCWorld.com. Thanks for coming. I'm Gordon Ung with Adam Patrick Murray.
See you later. Thank you, Wendell. Always good
Thank
chatting.
you.
Will Smith.
It was great to meet you, Wendell. Thanks for coming by.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Wendell of Level 1 Text, by the way. Go over to their channel, Level 1 Text, like and subscribe.
Yep.
And Willis Lai is going to hit the off switch.
All right. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I'm going to need more Mr. Brown and lunch. So see you guys later. Bye.
See ya.
See ya.
That is an unfortunate name for a product.